Years of routine had cemented my life into a predictable rhythm, steady work, an active lifestyle, and a marriage I believed was built on mutual respect. But cracks began to appear as my wife's frustrations surfaced in sharp words and icy silences. The person who once felt like my greatest ally seemed to view me as a stranger, or worse, an adversary. Yet, I couldn't bring myself to believe that the foundation we'd built would crumble completely. Despite the growing distance, I clung to the hope that this was a phase, one of those difficult stretches every couple encounters. It wasn't until I stumbled upon unsettling clues, small, subtle changes in her routine and a growing secrecy in her behavior, that I realized this was something far deeper than a rough patch. The day I decided to follow her after work was the day my illusions shattered, plunging me into a reality I never thought I'd face. A deep, involuntary groan rumbled from my chest as I struggled to shift positions. Consciousness had only just returned, yet my body seemed paralyzed, ignoring the frantic signals from my muddled mind to move quickly. Pain flared from every part of me, its intensity disorienting as I lay sprawled on the gritty ground. Dust rose with each strained breath, stinging my throat and filling my nose. Every inch of me ached. My ribs throbbed, my head pounded, and my limbs felt like lead weights pressing me down. Even the smallest movement sent shocks of agony rippling through my battered body. Somewhere I'd read that the human body can't feel pain from multiple areas at once. But I'm here to say, whoever wrote that article was a fool. Along with a groan, I heard a voice cutting through the darkness. "Hey, idiot, you awake and ready for round 2? A mocking laugh followed, cold and derisive, nothing like the sound of genuine amusement. I lay still, struggling to gather my thoughts. The first thing that came to mind was my name. Charlie Wilson, I muttered, barely above a whisper. That's it. That's my name. I'm 33 years old, an accountant. I'm 6 feet tall, about 200 pounds. I work out 3 times a week and run a 5K twice a week as part of my routine. Sometimes I mountain bike as a change. I'm married to Pam Wilson. She's 30 and we've been married 5 years. We don't have kids, not because I don't want them, but because Pam does. She wants to live a bit more before committing to kids. Now I remembered. That's why I was lying on the ground, breathing in dust. Our home life had seriously fallen apart over the past 6 to 8 weeks. It wasn't just the lack of closeness in the bedroom. No, it was the whole deal. Mocking comments about everything I did or didn't do. Angry outbursts over the smallest things, insults about my masculinity, my skin color, my hair, my family, everything. Pam had stopped cleaning up after herself and even refused to cook, something we'd always shared before things got cold. Yeah, I remember when we met, how we started dating. But right now, I didn't feel like wasting time on those memories. Finally fed up with the misuse and neglect in our marriage, I'd taken a day off to follow Pam, while she went to her job at the local supermarket. After her shift, things took an interesting turn. You know the old Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times? Well, it hit today, or rather, tonight. It was a warm September day, turning into an equally warm September evening. The temperature must have still been in the upper 60s. As I lay there in the dirt, reflecting on what had happened, Pam left work and drove to the nearest convenience store. I watched her pull a small overnight bag from the trunk of her car. By the way, she was driving a nice car, courtesy of me. Her meager wages hardly covered her clothes and makeup. I didn't mind covering all the bills. At least I didn't mind it until now. I loved her and wanted the best for her. When she came out of the store, she was wearing the shortest micro skirt I'd ever seen. If she hadn't been wearing a string and been shaved, you'd have been able to count every hair on her mound without even trying hard. Her blouse was sheer, and she wasn't wearing a bra. She swung her hips as she walked to her car, heading for the sleazy bars on the outskirts of town. I followed her. She pulled into the absolute worst bar in town, a biker hangout. Don't bother telling me there aren't bad bikers out there. I know, I'm a biker myself, but this wasn't the type of place where you find poker runs or charity events on weekends. Pam parked her car at the end of a row of bikes, making sure her lap was visible to everyone as she got out. A couple of bikers standing near the door just smiled and nodded as she walked past. Clearly, she was no stranger to these guys. I parked some distance away from the bikes and got out of my old truck. Sure, I could afford a newer one, but this truck meant something to me. My dad bought this Dodge Power Wagon in the 80s, and he kept it in perfect condition until his end in an industrial accident. I worked hard to keep it as original as possible, except for the lift kit and new 20-inch tires. The original chrome bumper had long since been replaced with a heavy wooden one. The truck was a little loud, but it was mine. The guys outside gave it a glance as I closed the door. It wasn't unusual enough for them to keep staring, so they went back to their conversation. As I got closer, I caught the scent of dopey in the air, which made sense given the location. I was wearing jeans and an old t-shirt, not my usual suit. Following my wife around wasn't something you do in business attire. I didn't exactly fit in, but at least I wasn't in a suit. I headed inside. There was no cover charge at this place. I made my way to the bar and ordered a beer. No fancy craft brew today, just whatever was on tap. While sipping my beer, I casually scanned the back bar mirror. Pam was easy to spot. There weren't many women here tonight, and Pam stood out, head and shoulders above the rest of the biker girls. She was already sitting on the lap of the biggest guy I'd ever seen. He was at least a foot taller than her while sitting down, and she was perched on his lap. This guy had to be well over 6 feet tall and at least 250 pounds. And it wasn't all muscle from a beer belly. He clearly worked out. I was about to finish my beer and leave when Pam stopped kissing the giant and glanced around, making sure all the other women saw she had the alpha male locked down. Her eyes found the back of my head. She looked away, then looked back again. Crap. She recognized me, I muttered to myself. I shot off the stool like it was coated in grease, desperate to get out. Pam's voice rang out behind me. "That's my husband, Charlie. Stop him, someone. He's going to ruin this for all of us." Before I could get far, a guy grabbed my arm. I spun around and shoved him into the wall hard enough to break free. A few steps toward the door, and another guy swung at my head. I have a hard head, and I wasn't always an accountant. Growing up in a rough neighborhood taught me how to handle myself. His punch grazed my head as I ducked, and I countered with a solid strike to his solar plexus. He grunted, doubling over, struggling to breathe. I didn't stick around to make sure he went down. I was almost at the door when another huge guy walked in. "Behemoth is yelling, 'Get him! Get him now!'" someone shouted. The guy blocked my way, making sure to keep me inside for a moment. My old football coach always said we had to block through our opponents, so I dropped my shoulder and aimed for the open space outside the bar. I punched him in the chest and drove him back, but I didn't shake him off completely. He wrapped his arms around me, and just as we cleared the door, he hurled me over his left shoulder. My momentum carried me down the stairs, and I hit the dirt hard. I got up quickly, but now Behemoth was in the fight. God, he was huge and built. He hammered through my defenses as I tried to protect my face and torso. I don't even know if I managed to land a single punch on his rock-hard body. All I remember was pain. Every hit, every punch, every kick. Once he had me on the ground, he didn't even seem to break a sweat as he took me apart. And he kept taunting me the whole time, saying things like, "Take this, loser. You think you can come into my place and cause trouble? I'm going to screw her 3 times tonight just to show you who's in charge. I drill her every night. She comes here, and then you get my sloppy seconds when she gets home." The insults went on and on until I was barely moving. As I lost consciousness, I could hear Pam laughing at my knockin' body. Behemoth told the others to watch me, warning, "If he gets up, let me know. I want another shot at this little crap before I'm done with him." When I regained consciousness, I had to come up with a plan to get out without taking another striking, or continuing the one I'd already received. I didn't know what would happen next, and I wasn't eager to find out. One of my eyes wouldn't open. It didn't feel swollen, so I assumed it was blood blocking my vision. I worked my right hand, which had been trapped under me when I fell, until I could reach my eye. It had been some time since I blacked out. As I rubbed the dried blood away, I finally managed to get my eyelid open and could see a little. My left eye seemed fine. Not knowing where the watchers were, I hoped I was hidden in the shadows. I began to slowly inch toward my truck. I moved a few inches at a time, as quietly as I could, stopping to make sure no one had noticed. Then I moved a little more. I kept this up, inching closer to the truck. Once I was behind the bikes near Pam's car, I carefully got up on my knees. I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek to keep from crying out from the pain. My breathing was shallow and ragged, so I guessed I had some broken ribs. Even taking a small breath hurt like hell. Sharp pain reminded me to move slowly, carefully. Once I was on my feet, I looked around. My watchers were clearly distracted, probably due to the extra dope and booze they had been given. They were seated next to the building, barely paying attention to anything happening around them. The Taliban would have had a field day with these idiots. I turned and checked my surroundings. No one was near my truck. I hunched over and moved slowly toward my ride. I unlocked the door and opened it. Now would be the time for an alarm, with the dome light flicking on like a beacon in the otherwise dark parking lot. I regretted jacking up the truck so high as I struggled to climb in. The only thing keeping me from getting caught was the fear of being seen before I reached safety. I sucked it up and got inside. I slid into the seat, put the key in the ignition, and shut the door. The dome light turned off. I took a few calming breaths, trying to figure out my next move. Starting the truck would break the silence and alert my attackers. How could I get away? As I looked out, a smile slowly spread across my face. Crap. My teeth and lips ached, so the smile quickly faded. Right in front of me, about 30 yards away, was Pam's car and all the bikes lined up neatly. Did I have the power to make it happen? I couldn't crawl back out and engage the hubs, so I'd have to do this in two-wheel drive. This old truck didn't have the automatic hubs like newer ones. It was time. I cranked the engine, and it fired on the first try. Dropping the transmission into low, I floored the gas. The watchers by the door, bleary-eyed, looked up just in time to see my truck charging toward Pam's car and the bikes. The huge piece of timber in front of my truck slammed into the left side of Pam's car. The car was so light it almost lifted off the ground. I know because I lifted it. It crashed into the bikes on the other side. The noise was deafening, fully waking up the watchers, who began screaming. I kept pushing forward until my progress was halted. I quickly backed up, relieved nothing got stuck, then twisted the wheel and hit second gear, clearing the worst of the wreckage. I twisted the wheel again and hit the rest of the bikes, this time with enough force to shove them right up against the bar's door, blocking anyone trying to exit. Unfortunately, I couldn't smash into the building itself. I would have loved to drop the whole mess right on Pam and her lover. I backed up, spun the truck around, kicking up a cloud of dust as I sped out of the parking lot and away from town. I was hurting, and my breathing hadn't gotten any better despite the effort of steering and shifting gears. I needed a hospital, but not the local community one. No, I was heading about 50 miles west to a trauma center. For the first few miles, I saw no one behind me. The two-lane highway seemed empty for some reason. Then a couple of headlights appeared in the distance, and a few more followed close behind. No red or blue lights, though, no cops. Soon, the headlights grew closer. I saw they were motorcycle headlights. I guess I hadn't taken them all out. A couple of bikes came up beside me, and I heard the sound of chain pieces bouncing off the metal. Damn it. I didn't think they could hurt the truck, but they could definitely mess up the paint. My mind raced, trying to figure out how to stop them or escape. I knew their top speed was likely faster than my old truck, so outrunning them wasn't an option. In desperation, I swerved over the center line and forced the two bikes alongside me off the road. Those big bikes didn't handle ditches well, and both of them crashed. While I took out the ones on the left, a few others came up on my right. Another quick swerve, and I sent them into the dirt on the right side of the road. I caught a glimpse of one guy cartwheeling off his bike. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy. I still had several more bikes behind me, dangerously close. I hoped they wouldn't get the idea to jump into my truck bed. That would bring them too close for comfort, as if they weren't already too close. Suddenly, I slammed on the brakes and felt a small thump. I hit the gas again, and when I looked in the rear view, there were no more headlights behind me. Crap. In every movie, the bikers always pester the car driver until they win. Is it really that easy to beat a motorcycle? When I neared Centerville and the trauma center, my mind began racing again. How could I keep Pam from finding me? She and Behemoth would probably think I'd either go home to lick my wounds or head to the nearest hospital. When they couldn't find me there, they'd probably look further afield if I ended up in a regular bed at the trauma center. How could I protect myself? I kept thinking as I slowed down to a crawl. Finally, I remembered an acquaintance who owned some land near Centerville. He rented out the pasture and rarely checked on it, so it might be the perfect spot for me. I headed to where I thought his small ranch was. The place had been abandoned for years, but the old farmhouse and barn were still standing, surrounded by tall trees. I pulled in and parked my truck behind the barn. I left my wallet and ID in the cab, placing my keys on top of the rear wheel where they wouldn't be easy to spot. Damn, it hurt to walk, but I needed to get some distance from the truck. Once I made the emergency call, local law enforcement would be out looking for my truck. I made it about a mile before the pain and shortness of breath became unbearable. I sat down on the gravel road's edge and pulled out my cell phone. I dialed emergency, whispering when the operator answered, "Help me. I was abducted and knocking, and woke up on the side of the road. I don't know where I am. Please send help." Other than lying about knowing my location, everything else I said was true. I really needed help. The operator tried to get me to find landmarks, but I just let the phone drop to my side. I knew they could locate me via my phone's GPS. All they had to do was ping it, and they'd get a pretty accurate location unless I was on the edge of the coverage area. I did whisper that I was on a gravel road, but there were no signs to offer more details. I then lay down to rest. I must have fallen asleep or lost consciousness because the next thing I knew, someone was bending over me. At first, I couldn't tell who it was. Had Behemoth or one of his cronies found me? It was definitely a man, so it couldn't have been Pam. Besides, I'd wrecked her car, so unless she had another ride, it wasn't her. It was starting to get light out. Daybreak couldn't be far off, but what day was it? Had I been lying here for more than a day? The voice kept asking questions. I made up a name for him in my head. My voice was still a whisper. The striking, combined with not having anything to drink for who knows how long, made it worse. My name is Sam Adams. I live in Wilsonville. I'm 40 years old, and I'm allergic to penicillin. Of course, no one could refute my claims without ID, and the man asking the questions didn't know that. I just had to stick to my story. I told him I must have been mugged, knocked out, and dumped here. I asked him what day it was. I nearly sighed with relief when it was clear I hadn't been unconscious for more than a day. Soon, an ambulance arrived, and I was taken to the trauma center. The paramedic in the back with me started an IV and gave me something for nausea and pain. I didn't complain much, except when the stretcher hit a bump. We were at the trauma center in just a few minutes. A nice nurse carefully washed the dried blood off my face, and the doctor tut-tutted over my injuries. I stuck to the story that I'd been abducted, knock-in, and dumped in a rural area. I told them my wallet was missing, so I had no ID. I gave them a birth date that combined my mom's birthday with my brother's birth year. I could easily remember that lie. The birth date would make me 36 instead of 40, but I figured they wouldn't care since I had been unconscious a few times since the striking. Soon, a police officer entered and began questioning me. I gave him the name of a nearby town where the abduction supposedly took place. There were plenty of small towns around Centerville, so it wasn't hard to come up with something. But when he asked for my home address, I realized I'd have to come up with another lie. Too many lies might be hard to keep straight. I also told him I was divorced and had no family. That one would be easier to manage. Then the cop asked a strange question. Do you ride a motorcycle? That one was easy to answer, and I didn't need to worry about the truth. I used to, many years ago, I said, but I haven't owned a bike in a long time. Why do you ask? I added, curious. We're investigating an accident, or actually a series of accidents, about 20 miles from here, the officer explained. 2 bikers were eliminated in one crash, and 6 others are injured, ranging from broken bones to critical head trauma. None of the riders can tell us what happened. We have detectives looking into it because it doesn't add up. These guys are hardcore riders, and crashes like this just don't make sense. The theory is that a rival motorcycle gang might have caused the wrecks. I shook my head, trying to seem as clueless as possible. I don't even know anyone in a bike club, I replied. No one I work with owns a bike or does poker runs. The officer leaned forward, studying me. Any idea who might have wanted to hurt you? Nope, I answered quickly. I'm divorced, live alone. I work on a non-union construction site, and we haven't had trouble with the union guys in a while. I go out for a beer once a week, but I have a drinking problem, so I don't let myself get too drunk. Last time I didn't sober up for 3 or 4 weeks. It was hell getting my reputation back. My ex-wife remarried and seems to be doing fine. She probably left me because of my drinking. I don't think her husband's jealous. She probably tells him all the awful things I used to do. The officer finally left, and the nurse returned. The doctor wants you to stay here tonight. He's concerned about your kidney function. There was some blood in your urine. You've got broken ribs too, which need time to heal. There's not much we can do about those except give you some pain medication so you can breathe properly. I nodded and let them do their thing. Once she left, I pulled out my cell phone and called my brother, Dave. I know it's early, but I need some help. Dave's pretty laid back, so he took it without question. I told him what had happened and where I was, including my fake name to use if he came to see me. What do you need right now? He asked. He'd always liked Pam, but didn't give me any grief. I figured that might come later, but not now. I need my stuff from the house. If you could arrange for a mover who won't ask questions and make sure that woman doesn't interfere, then my things could be moved to a storage facility. Can you handle that? He didn't hesitate. Growing up in a rough neighborhood, he knew a few guys who knew some other guys who were experienced at quick moves. I texted him a list of what I wanted taken from the house. I didn't care if they had to force the door. Next, I called a realtor, an old friend from the neighborhood. "Mike, I need a quick favor." "No problem, Charlie. What's going on?" Mike's voice was calm, like always. "Pam's cheating on me with a biker. I don't know his name, but he hangs out at Mario's out by the edge of town. I'm not too worried about him right now. We'll deal with that later. What I need is to list my house and sell it fast so Pam can't move that idiot into my place." I paused for a moment, trying to keep my voice steady. I'd bought the house right after we got married. Pam's credit had ruined our chances of getting a house together, so the mortgage and title were in my name only. I'd always planned to add her to the title, but I'd put it off. Maybe deep down, I'd known this day was coming. Sure, she was entitled to half, but we hadn't gone to court yet, and I planned to make things as difficult as possible for her. "All right, Charlie, I get it," Mike said, his tone serious. "But what happens if Pam's at the house when I show up to do the market assessment and put the sign up?" "Right now, she's just a tenant," I replied. "She doesn't have any say about the ownership." Mike was quiet for a second, then asked, "Okay, but how do I handle it if she's there?" I thought for a moment. "I think you should act as my rental manager. Take her a lease agreement, month to month, and tell her she has to maintain the property in sellable condition and be ready for showings. Make it clear that if she doesn't sign, she'll be evicted." Mike chuckled, though it wasn't exactly a cheerful sound. "I don't think she's smart enough to fight it until she gets a lawyer, and I don't think she'll do that until she gets served." I told him about the movers who'd be coming soon. He chuckled and said he'd pick up a new lock for whichever door got breached. After that, I was moved to a new room, given breakfast, and managed to get some sleep. I wasn't planning on calling a lawyer just yet, let her stew for a few days. Dave called me back later that afternoon. "Charlie, it's all done," he said, his voice steady. "The guys went over, grabbed your recliner, microwave, washer and dryer, the guest bedroom set, your tools and tool safe, and all your tools. They even took all the dishes, pans, and utensils, even though you didn't ask for those. They just wanted to make things as inconvenient as possible for Pam." I sighed, rubbing my temple. "And the bed in the master suite?" Dave hesitated for a moment. "Well, some bleach spilled on it. I don't think it's salvageable. The room might need a couple of days to air out." I had to chuckle, though it twisted something inside me. "Was she there?" "They didn't see her anywhere," Dave replied. "I think they were hoping for a confrontation. You know the guys. They don't like witches." I agreed, though my tone was flat. He wrapped up the call, telling me he'd come pick me up when I was released. Now, you might be wondering how I was handling the finances. Did she have time to clean out the accounts? Well, didn't I mention I'm an accountant? A good one. Some of my clients come from the old neighborhood and deal with, let's say, less than legal income. I make sure their money looks clean for the IRS. I also only allowed Pam to have access to her personal account and a joint account. I regularly deposited into the joint account, but she couldn't touch the savings or investment accounts. Sure, I'd have to share it with her later, but not until a judge decided. Right now, she had only her wages from her cashier job to rely on, unless Behemoth was covering her expenses. I checked the account balances. She'd withdrawn all the available cash from the joint account. No problem. I still had my own account where my paycheck went, and it wasn't even at the same bank. Around 6 in the evening, Mark called me back. I didn't know he had no love for Pam until he told me what happened. "Charlie, your wife was a little upset when I showed up at the house late this afternoon," Mark began. "Apparently the front door was wide open when she got home and stuff was missing. She was polite at first, but when I pulled out the new lock and started replacing the old one, she didn't take it too well. She wasn't happy when I put the key in a box on the door and secured it." I grimaced at the thought. "By the way, you're going to need a new front door. That one's too damaged and could hurt the sale," Mark added. I chuckled despite myself, but it was the pain medicine they'd given me that really helped ease the discomfort. "Did she have any issues with the fact that she's now a tenant and has to pay rent?" I asked. Mark laughed bitterly. "Oh yeah, that went over like a lead balloon. When I told her the house was for sale, she nearly lost it. She yelled at me to leave. I told her I was the new rental manager and that only the property owner could force me off the premises. Then I handed her the lease to sign. Naturally, she refused and kept asking where you were. Have you blocked her number? She kept saying you weren't answering her calls. I didn't think you'd want her to know where you are, and honestly, I don't know either." I groaned. "Well, that didn't exactly help her situation." "Darn it," Mark said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Did you tell her she'd be evicted if she doesn't sign the lease?" I asked. "Yeah," Mark replied. But you know how some people think they know better than everyone else. I gave her 24 hours to sign, or I'd serve the eviction notice. I hope she doesn't sign. If she doesn't, she'll be out within 30 days. I know a couple of sheriff's deputies who can't stand cheating wives, and they'll be happy to help her move out, even if it's just to the curb. After we hung up, I checked my phone, though I was a bit out of it, and realized I had actually blocked her number. There were several missed calls starting around midnight last night, along with multiple texts. Instead of deleting them, I decided to keep them, just in case my future divorce attorney needed them, along with the voice messages. I managed to sleep pretty well that night, probably thanks to the pain meds. But I like to think the thought of making Pam upset helped more than the medication. The next morning, the doctor came by. I was being discharged. My kidney function had improved, and my breathing was stable, but I wasn't going to be doing any running for a while. He was very clear about that. I promised to take care of myself and, of course, not get abducted again. When Dave arrived, I'd already corrected my name for admissions and called the office to ensure they got the insurance details to the nurse, since I still didn't have my wallet. Dave took me to my truck, and we headed back to our hometown. I certainly wasn't going to call it my home anymore, since now I was homeless. Once we got into town, I checked in with work, at least. My boss was furious about my disappearing for days. He calmed down when I explained that I'd been abducted, knockin', and left on the side of the road to die. He also wanted to know who might have wanted to hurt me. He mentioned that Pam had been trying to find me. I'm pretty sure he didn't appreciate my dry laugh when I told him she could go to hell. He probably had some desire to be with Pam, and honestly, if his wife was okay with it, I didn't care. I arranged to take a couple more days off, since it was a slow period at work with quarterly reports done and tax season still far off. I quickly found an apartment near my office. The local economy wasn't great, but that made housing more affordable. I signed a year-long lease, paid the necessary deposits, and got the electricity and gas transferred to my name. I also called the cell phone company, switched my plan to month, and arranged to shut off Pam's phone in a few days. That would give me time to inform her she was on her own. After that, I went to a furniture rental place, picked out a couch, a bedroom set, and then bought some pots, pans, dishes, and utensils. I knew Dave's friends had taken all that, but I figured I could give it back to Pam if she asked. I called Dave and set up a time for the movers to bring my things over. I sat in my new place, phone in hand, and dialed my soon-to-be ex-wife. To my surprise, she picked up on the first ring. "Hello? Is that you, Charlie? Unless someone stole my phone, it must be you." "Why do you have to be so insulting?" I shot back. "Where are you, and why haven't you been home? Are you that stupid?" She responded coolly. "I stopped at a bar to have a beer and saw you with your new lover. I didn't even try to confront you. After the way you've been treating me these last few months, it was obvious you found someone new, and I was just your convenient bill payer. I tried to leave, but your boyfriend stopped me. He beat me up while you just stood there and laughed. I had to crawl away and ended up in the hospital for a few days, wondering if my ribs or kidneys would survive his attack. And you're asking me why I haven't been back to the house? Are you really that deranged? Why would I put myself anywhere near you so your new man can punch me again? Do you want me dead?" She started rambling, spitting out a stream of nonsensical blabber, but I cut her off. "I hope you're recording this," I said, my voice cold. "Is that what you've been planning? Get me eliminated, then spin some story. Maybe I was jealous of your innocent relationship with that idiot. Then you get everything. The house, my money, my pension, and my life insurance. Bravo. Too bad I ruined your little scheme." There was a pause, and then I heard her start to cry. "I need you to come home. Everything's gone wrong," she sobbed. "The house is for sale. Stuff's missing. I think someone broke in before I got home and stole things." I scoffed, a dark amusement in my voice. "Yeah, someone I know broke in and took my stuff along with some things I needed to set up my new place. I'll be all set up by tomorrow. Sucks to be you, but I'm sure your new man will be there to support you." She was almost frantic now. "How could you be so cruel? That realtor told me I have to pay rent. Why do I have to pay rent for our home? This isn't right." I couldn't help but snort at her stupidity. "Yes, I actually snorted on the phone," I said. "What happened to us? Are you really that clueless, or do you think I'm the one who's dumb? Look in the mirror if you want your answer. You decided to treat me like garbage and start a relationship with a dirtbag before you even left me. You spent my money on new clothes and went out drinking with him. That night wasn't the first time you were with him. Everyone knew who you were and who you belonged to. Then you stood there and laughed as he struck me half to death. If I had made any noise when I woke up, he would have finished the job. I have no doubt about that." I paused for a beat before delivering the final blow. So kiss my bum. You're now a renter and Mike is the landlord. Don't talk to me about rent. Just pay it or get out. She was quiet for a moment before asking, but I need some money. There's nothing left in the checking account. There won't be, I replied. I'll keep paying the utilities until the house sells, but you'll pay the rent with your paycheck. You have a job. Stop spending on makeup and clothes for a while. You've got enough stuff to get by, or better yet, have your boyfriend pay for you. Her voice cracked as she responded, but you're my husband. You were supposed to take care of me. Yeah, I snapped. And as my wife, you were supposed to cheer while your lover and his friends knocked me up. Guess we both lose, huh? There was a pause on the line. Finally, she asked, what about a car? My car's totaled, and I need a way to get to work. I couldn't resist. Call your boyfriend. You can ride on the back of his bike. You're already used to straddling something that belongs to him. She shot back quickly. He's in the hospital with a head injury and multiple broken bones. He was chasing you when you hit the brakes. He slammed into the ground and flew a few meters, landing on his head. Karma, I guess. Too bad he didn't die. I felt a sick sense of satisfaction. Tell him I'll be keeping an eye out for him. If I see him first, I'll avoid him. Otherwise, I'll be carrying my tool and shooting instead of talking. The excuses kept coming. Finally, I told her to eat crap and die, then hung up. Her number was still blocked, so I didn't even have to turn my phone off. I tried to sleep, honestly I did, but with no bed and too much pain to lie on the floor, I couldn't. I finally left the apartment and checked into a decent motel just to get some rest in a real bed. It took everything I had to get up the next morning. God, I hope I heal fast. I wonder if boxers feel this bad after going 10 rounds with someone as tough or tougher than they are. I grabbed a quick breakfast and headed back to the apartment. Before long, Dave's crew had unloaded all my things and set them up. I gave each of them an extra $100 for their trouble. After that, the rental place delivered the couch and other items. I tipped them as well. I'd need to hit the bank for some walking around money soon. I like to keep a couple thousand in cash stashed somewhere easy to grab. I'm not a saint, and someone might one day take an interest in my accounting for certain less than legal clients. So I've got my go bag ready. And yes, it's not in my former house. I sat down in my familiar recliner and started thinking about my future. Should I lay low for a while or just go about business as usual and act like everything's fine? When should I pull the trigger on divorcing my cheating wife? Should I string her along for a while longer? Or should I act like we might get back together and then dump her? Nah, the last option was pointless. She'd just move on to Behemoth or whoever replaced him. Maybe I'll keep her guessing until she finally gets smart enough to hire a lawyer. In our state, the reason for a divorce doesn't affect the outcome. Unless she goes to jail for what her boyfriend did to me, no judge will care why we're splitting up. They'll just divide up what's public knowledge, and she'll get at least 50% of everything. The rest will be mine. So how can I make her life a little more miserable? I need my retribution. The gravy train's over, and now she'll have to fend for herself. I hope the house sells quickly. I priced it to go fast, even in this market. Her boyfriend's in the hospital, and I don't know how bad his injuries are, but I hope he doesn't fully recover and ends up brain damaged, fed through a tube for the rest of his miserable life. And the same goes for any of his buddies who were involved when he struck me down. They all need to suffer for what they did. Do I expect his friends to visit? Yes. Eventually, they'll try to fix what they believe was wronged against them. I went to the spot where the movers placed my tool safe and pulled out my judge. It only holds 5 rounds, but can shoot both .45 long Colt and .410 shot shells. I loaded it with .410 slugs, capable of blasting through a concrete wall. I decided to carry it with me, both in the apartment and outside, with extra shells in my leg bag. I sat and thought for a moment. The best offense is a solid defense. So what's next? Who should pay for my wife's affair? I chose to wait and see what happened next. The next few days were quiet. I went back to work, keeping the judge on me just in case. Then Pam's new number started texting me. She thought we just had a minor argument, but when I asked about Behemoth, she acted confused. I pushed, asking about her biker friend, and she finally said, Steve is doing better, but he might not walk or ride again. I couldn't help but think, Steve doesn't strike fear, but Grizzly? That's a name I can respect. She still wanted to know when I'd come home, to which I said, never, before hanging up and blocking her number. A few days later, a biker tried to follow me from work. With his leathers and long beard, he stood out in the business district. I took a few sharp turns to lose him in traffic, leaving some frustrated drivers in my wake. I kept the judge within reach, just in case. The next day, another biker, just as conspicuous, tried to follow. I led him to Pam's house, knowing he likely didn't know where it was. After he passed, I turned around and went back home, hoping for a quieter night. My bruises were healing, but they still looked bad. The following morning, 2 cops stopped by my work, asking about my whereabouts the previous night. I had no alibi and was surprised when they mentioned Pam's house being vandalized. She'd claimed I did it, but I quickly pointed out that damaging the house would lower its sale price, something I wouldn't do while trying to sell. I told them the truth. She was having an affair with Steve, the man who knocked me up. If they were investigating, they should talk to him. The officers seemed to reconsider. They mentioned reports of loud motorcycles outside my house the night before and agreed to check on Pam's story. I explained that I had briefly stopped by Pam's place to grab more of my things, and someone may have followed me, assuming I still lived there. I also made sure to mention that the house had been vandalized and that Pam would need renter's insurance now. One of the officers laughed. Couldn't happen to a nicer person. I spoke to her yesterday, I said. She's still refusing to sign the lease agreement. I'll stop by with an officer and let her know she's responsible for keeping the house in livable condition once the damage is fixed. I assume you're not behind her discomfort? No, the officer replied. I have nothing to do with it. A couple of bikers, probably Behemoth's friends, have been trying to follow me. Yesterday, I led one of them past Pam's house. I'm sure the damage was a case of mistaken identity. The police are looking into it and have questions for her boyfriend, Steve. He chuckled again. Then I was interrupted by an unknown call. I checked the display. Pam. I answered, bracing for the worst. What do you want? She snapped. Why are you trying to get the cops on me? Why would I damage a property I'm trying to sell? Are you on something? Her aggression caught me off guard, but I quickly regained my composure. I thought you'd be smarter than that, Pam. You're accusing me of vandalism now. There was a pause, followed by the sound of her swallowing nervously. Her tone softened. Charlie, I'm sorry. When you were mad at me, I thought you might have done the damage. After the cops left, I called Steve. He admitted some of his friends might have been looking for revenge. You hurt a lot of guys and damaged their bikes. I couldn't hold back my frustration. I hurt someone? I was the one knocked out cold after your idiot of a boyfriend touched me. I don't know how you can say I hurt anyone. I was in the hospital. Pam's voice wavered, but she pressed on. Steve and his crew think you're the one who ran them off the road. They were just trying to stop you from going to the cops. You didn't have to hurt anyone. Jesus, I muttered. Do you hear yourself? I was the one knocking unconscious. Your boyfriend had people waiting to finish me off when I woke up. You stood by and cheered him on. And now his friends trashed your house and you're trying to pin it on me? Keep popping those stupid pills. You'll be turning tricks for Behemoth soon. She started to protest, her voice rising in anger, blaming me for everything. Shut up and listen, I interrupted. Mike will be over today to assess the damage for the insurance claim. I'm only insuring the property as a rental now, not as a private home. You'll need renter's insurance. But this is our home, not a rental. Why are you doing this? She asked, her voice tinged with confusion and disbelief. I had to take a breath. What part of your cheating and throwing away our marriage don't you get? This is on you. I was happy to support you, but you chose to start an affair and stand by while he strike me. You wanted me hurt. This is all on you. I ended the call and tried to focus on my day. My ribs were sore from breathing deeply to calm down. My face ached from the healing abrasions, and I was furious. As I left work, another biker was waiting. He didn't try to hide. He just followed a couple of cars behind me. I drove towards Centerville, then made some sharp turns to lose him. I stopped abruptly and turned my truck sideways, blocking the street. He couldn't maneuver, and his bike was too big to slide like a dirt bike. I got out, drew my judge, and held it up just enough to show I meant business, but not to threaten his life. He looked sick, trying to bluff. Hey, mister, I don't know what your problem is, but I just want to get home. Why the sudden stop? And the tool? I interrupted. You followed me since I left work. We're 40 miles from where you think you belong. No more warnings. You screwed up last week and watched Grizzlies strike me down. Some of your friends paid for that mistake. Others are still recovering. Last night, you vandalized Grizzly's girlfriend's house, thinking you had me. And now here you are, all alone, practically begging me to drop you like a bad habit. How much dumber can you get? One shot from this tool and you'll be lying in the street, a huge hole in your chest, life draining out. You'll be conscious long enough to know you're dying and there's nothing you can do about it. He started to bluster but stopped when I cocked the judge. I told you no more warnings. If you survive, I hope you tell your buddies how serious I am. I've sworn out a protection order against you and your friends. If this goes to court, I'll plead self-defense. I don't think anyone will care if I take a few of you out. Hell, maybe I'll even get a humanitarian award for it. I stepped closer. Look around. Do you see anyone watching us? The neighbors probably heard your bike but don't want to get involved. No sirens. The cops either don't know or don't care. He glanced around. No one was in sight, even though it was early evening. I clicked the cylinder. 2 stops. He looked even more terrified. I raised the judge and shot out his headlight with a .410 birdshot shell. No penetration, but it sent a clear message. Now get this piece of crap. Turn around and head home. It's getting dark and you've got no headlight. I might follow, and I'm guessing you won't fare well in a nighttime collision. He nodded and quickly turned his bike around, peeling off like a scalded dog. I waited until he rounded the corner before heading toward downtown, keeping a lookout for any of his buddies. When I got to my apartment, I parked behind the building as usual, swapped the empty shell for one with slugs, and went inside. No more Mr. Nice Guy. The rest of the evening was quiet. I hoped it would stay that way, but the peace only lasted a month until Steve got out of the hospital. One night I drove home checking my mirrors. No sign of anyone following, so I relaxed and parked as usual. After a frozen meal and some football, I was ready for bed when there was a loud banging on the door. Steve had found me. I turned on my phone's video recorder and called emergency, explaining I was in danger. The dispatcher could hear the yelling and assured me help was on the way. I considered opening the door, but I didn't want to risk it looking like entrapment. Instead, I waited for him to break in. When he did, the door crashed open, one hinge torn from the frame. Steve, grinning, charged in. "Well, craphead, time to pay for your mistake." He raised his hands to strike, but didn't notice the tool in my hand. I defended myself by firing 2 shots in his direction, aiming to stop his advance. His hands dropped, and he staggered toward me with a confused look. I sidestepped him and saw 2 more bikers entering. They were here to finish the job, but I didn't give them the chance. I aimed carefully, and each shot effectively neutralized the threat without further escalation. Those slugs have great stopping power. It wasn't like the movies. There were no dramatic slams against the door, just bodies dropping and groaning. I called emergency again, telling them to send ambulances. As I reloaded the judge, I started hearing sirens and the roar of motorcycles. It seemed Steve's friends didn't want to stick around for an interview. The 2 bikers I shot were still alive, breathing and writhing in pain, likely hit in the abdomen. Steve appeared severely injured, struggling to breathe as he clutched his chest. He wasn't defeated yet, still muttering curses. "You a hole, why didn't you just die when I punch you? She belongs to me now." I looked him straight in the eyes. "I told her to tell you I'd avoid you, but if you came after me, I'd put you down like a rabid dog. Clearly you didn't learn your lesson. Hope your friends do before I deal with them." "You think you're tough?" I turned off my phone's recorder, then leaned close to his ear. "I have friends who won't say a word. They'll just make you and your buddies disappear. No one will know where you went. Families will wonder, but there'll be no answers. Just a hole in the ground." Steve's eyes glazed over, and he took his last breath before I could say anything else. The cops arrived, and I made sure to show I wasn't a threat by kneeling on the floor with the judge open, shells in front of me, hands behind my head. The first officer kept his tool on us while I was cuffed. They cuffed the other 2 bikers, even though they weren't a threat at that moment. A quick search found knives and tools on the bikers, and Behemoth was carrying brass knuckles when they examined his body. Ambulances arrived, and the 2 bikers, looking pale, were rushed to the trauma center. The cops interviewed me after reading my Miranda rights. I had them contact an attorney I knew, and I gave my statement without holding back. They took my phone, time-stamped the emergency call, and found photos of my injuries and messages from Pam. I knew the DA would have plenty of evidence. I was booked on manslaughter, attack, and firearm charges. A detective warned that more charges could follow. But once my attorney arrived, the questions stopped. The next morning, I was released on my own recognizance. The press had already spun the story in my favor, and the DA had received calls demanding my release. Though charges were still pending, I wasn't worried. I had friends who would arm me again if needed. The DA also told me that Pam was changing her story, claiming Steve had come to make peace and ask me to be his accountant. I laughed. The DA said the recordings told a different story, and he hoped the violence would die down. I just nodded as I left. Pam was waiting outside. "You butcher! How dare you liquidate my man? He just came to bury the hatchet." She tried to slap me, but 2 cops were nearby and quickly cuffed her. My attorney had them press charges for domestic attack, and they took her away. Hopefully, the DA would play the recording of the break-in and the attack for her, but I doubted it would shut her up. Since my apartment was still a crime scene, Dave took me to his place. It was time to end this. My attorney started the divorce proceedings with Pam, then left. Dave and I had a council of war about Steve's friends and how they needed to learn the consequences of their actions. My old friends would help deliver that lesson. First order of business. The owner of Mario's, the bar where all this started, suddenly sold out to a group of investors. The place was set to close down and undergo a major renovation. I heard the new theme was going to be a venue for kids' birthday parties. The bikers would need to find a new spot to gather, drink, and do whatever else they got into. Before Mario's closed for good, a couple of tough-looking guys, who made no effort to hide the fact they were packing serious heat, walked in and sat down at the table used by the bike club for their business. I later heard that everyone at that table walked away knowing that any further attempts at retaliation against me would be considered a problem for my friends. A few names were even dropped, old acquaintances and business partners with less than stellar reputations. I'm pretty sure the message hit home. It took a few weeks, but eventually the charges were dropped. Pam tried to make a fuss, but the DA made it clear that lying to the police was a felony. So she finally admitted that Stevie wasn't trying to hire me for anything. He just wanted to make me pay for hurting his friends. She didn't seem sorry about it. I guess she truly thought she loved him, and that he felt the same. It cost me half of my publicly known assets to get her out of my life, but it was worth it. And just to be clear, only my publicly known assets. A little birdie told me that a very unpleasant woman paid Pam a visit after the final hearing, and Pam decided to move far enough away so we wouldn't cross paths. My friend didn't give me the full details, but it seems the conversation involved some strong persuasion to help her understand what needed to happen. Pam even tried to sue me again for hiding assets, but after that visit, she quickly realized that money wasn't worth the trouble. I don't know exactly what was said or how it was said, but whatever it was, she got the message loud and clear. While Pam was still living in the house, it was quickly repaired. I also paid for some upgrades the contractor promised would increase the house's value. Oh yes, she paid the rent, as I'd instructed. I guess she realized I wasn't joking. After Steve paid the ultimate price, and after the final divorce decree and Pam's move, the house was sold. I made sure to deposit half of the proceeds into her account. That was the last of my known assets. And yes, I got my tools back. The police gave me a warning that they were keeping an eye on me, but I just smiled and reloaded. The judge. Even after my unnamed friend sent a warning to the bike club, I was ready for someone to try to take me down. Some people never seem to learn their lessons. I'm still working at the same accounting firm, and I still have some of my old friends from the neighborhood as clients. My boss is happy with the revenue I'm bringing in, so he doesn't question who my clients are. I also keep my go-bag stashed somewhere just in case things start getting a little too hot around here, especially after I had to take down one attacker and wound a couple of others. It's amazing how something like that can get a few sharp cops watching you, adding up little clues and bits of evidence until they start connecting the dots. Recently, my boss sent me down to Baja, Mexico. A new client needs help figuring out how to clean up his dirty money and turn it into legitimate business revenue. He's a nice enough guy, but for some strange reason, he keeps asking me if I like stew. And as for dating, once in a while, I'll go on a real date with a real woman. Mostly I have a few friends with benefits, but the true loves of my life right now are the 2 new German Shepherd puppies I adopted. If you wake up to 2 little puppies wagging their tails and showering you with kisses, you know your life is pretty damn good.
Welcome back, and thank you for tuning into Cheating Tales Lab. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know, what part of the world are you watching from right now? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Ted Kinney's meticulously maintained backyard. He stood on his wraparound deck, hands gripping the polished mahogany railing, watching a small army of caterers transform the space into an elegant venue. White-clothed tables dotted the lawn like oversized mushrooms, while strings of crystal lights were being hung between the mature oak trees that bordered his property. "Table 4 needs to be 3 feet to the left," Ted called out, gesturing to a pair of caterers struggling with a particularly heavy table. We need clear paths between all the seating areas. At 52, Ted carried himself with the confidence of a self-made man. His salt and pepper hair was neatly trimmed, and his custom-tailored suit fit his athletic frame perfectly. He unconsciously adjusted the new Patek Philippe watch on his wrist, Madeline's latest gift. The timepiece probably cost more than his first construction truck, but that was the kind of life they lived now. Still micromanaging every detail, I see. A familiar voice called from behind him. Ted turned to see Carol Lancaster, his best friend and business partner of 15 years, approaching with 2 crystal tumblers of scotch. Carol's tie was already slightly loosened, his jacket draped over one arm, a stark contrast to Ted's impeccable appearance. Someone has to make sure it's done right. Ted accepted the offered drink, taking a small sip. Macallan 25? Only the best for your 20th, Carol replied, leaning against the railing. Quite the turnout expected tonight? Madeline insisted, Ted said, watching another catering van pull into the circular driveway. Seems half of Boston's elite will be here. The guest list reads like a who's who of New England society. Carol shifted uncomfortably, his expression turning serious. Ted, there's something you should know about that European investor who's been hanging around the office lately. I've been doing some digging and… Darling! Madeline's voice rang out from the French doors leading to the house. She glided onto the deck, a vision in a champagne-colored Vera Wang gown that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. At 48, she still turned heads, her blonde hair styled in elegant waves, diamonds glittering at her throat and ears. Behind her strode a tall, distinguished-looking man with olive skin and salt and pepper hair. His Italian suit screamed old money, and his smile carried the confident charm of European aristocracy. Phil arrived early, Madeline announced, touching Ted's arm with perfectly manicured fingers. You remember Phil Melendez, the art dealer from Barcelona? He's been so helpful with furnishing the new office building. Phil stepped forward, extending his hand. Ted, wonderful to see you again. The property is looking magnificent. His accent was subtle but unmistakable, adding an air of sophistication to his words. Ted shook the offered hand, noting how familiar Phil seemed with his surroundings. Glad you could make it, Phil. I trust your flight was comfortable? But of course, your lovely wife arranged everything perfectly. Phil's eyes lingered on Madeline for a fraction too long. She has impeccable taste. Before Ted could respond, excited voices called from the lawn. Uncle Phil, Lance and Jeannie, the twins, bounded up the deck stairs. At 16, they were the perfect blend of their parents, or so Ted had always thought. Lance had his father's build and his mother's fair coloring, while Jeannie was a younger version of Madeline with what Ted had assumed was his own dark eyes. Ah, Ms. Niños. Phil's face lit up as he embraced the teenagers. You've grown so much since Christmas. Ted frowned slightly. Had Phil been at their Christmas celebration? He couldn't recall, but then again, he'd been busy with the Morrison project deadline. Did you bring us anything from Barcelona? Jeannie asked, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Phil laughed, reaching into his jacket. Would I ever forget? He produced 2 small wrapped packages. But these are for later, yes? Carol cleared his throat. Ted, about what I was saying. Darling, Madeline interrupted smoothly. The band needs to know where to set up. Would you mind? Ted nodded, downing the last of his scotch. As he walked away, he could hear Phil asking the twins about their studies, speaking with the familiarity of a close relative rather than a casual business acquaintance. The next hour passed in a blur of logistics and greetings as guests began to arrive. Ted found himself playing the role of gracious host, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, and making small talk about business and politics. Yet he couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. From across the rapidly filling backyard, he caught sight of Kimberly Orr, his secretary of 12 years. She was standing near the bar, her expression troubled as she watched him. She'd been trying to speak with him privately for weeks now, but something always seemed to come up. Usually Madeline needing his attention for some urgent matter. Mr. Kinney? Kimberly started making her way toward him, but Madeline suddenly appeared at his side. Ted, the Hendersons just arrived. You must come say hello. Richard is considering investing in that new development project. As his wife led him away, Ted glanced back to see Kimberly's shoulders slump in resignation. The party was in full swing as the sun began to set. Hundreds of tiny lights twinkled in the trees, casting a warm glow over the gathering. A jazz quartet played sophisticated background music while waiters circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Ted stood near the bar, observing the scene with a businessman's eye for detail. The catering was impeccable, the music perfectly pitched to enable conversation, the lighting creating an intimate atmosphere despite the large crowd. Everything was perfect, almost too perfect. His gaze drifted to where Phil Melendez held court near the pool, surrounded by admiring guests. The art dealer was regaling them with what appeared to be an amusing story, his hands gesturing expressively. Madeline stood at his elbow, laughing at all the right moments, her hand occasionally brushing his arm. They seemed quite comfortable together, Carol murmured, appearing at Ted's side with fresh drinks. Ted accepted the scotch without taking his eyes off the scene. Phil's been around a lot this past year. Potential investments in the company, art consulting for the new buildings, cultural advice for our European expansion. About that, Carol began, lowering his voice. I've been looking into his background, and something doesn't add up. His investment firm? Dad. Lance's voice cut through their conversation as he approached with a group of his friends. Uncle Phil was just telling us about his villa in Barcelona. He says we should come stay for the summer. Ted's brow furrowed. Uncle Phil? Lance's expression flickered for a moment before he recovered. Oh, that's just what we call him. He's around so much. It just feels natural. How long has he been around so much? Ted asked carefully. Oh, Lance shifted uncomfortably. Hey, is it okay if we use the pool house to change? Some of us want to swim. Before Ted could respond, Phil appeared behind Lance, resting a familiar hand on the boy's shoulder. Perhaps swimming isn't the best idea, Mijo. The night air is getting chilly, and we wouldn't want you catching cold before your big tennis match tomorrow. Ted stared at Phil. How did he know about Lance's tennis schedule? Uncle Phil's right. Lance agreed easily. Come on, guys, let's grab some food instead. As the teenagers moved away, Phil gave Ted a practice smile. Wonderful boys you have, Ted. They remind me so much of myself at that age. The same spirit, the same fire in their eyes. Ted forced himself to return the smile, even as something cold settled in his stomach. They're good kids. Take after their mother mostly. Ah, yes. Phil's eyes drifted to where Madeline was chatting with some guests. Madeline is exceptional. You're a lucky man, Ted. Before Ted could respond, Kimberly approached again, clutching her phone. Mr. Kinney, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something urgent I need to discuss. Ted. Madeline's voice cut through the conversation like a knife. The Blakelines want to discuss that charity gala they're planning. Come, darling, you simply must hear their ideas. As Ted was led away once again, he noticed Phil and Kimberly exchange a look, his smugly confident, hers filled with frustrated concern. The night wore on, and Ted found himself watching his family with new eyes. He noticed how Jeannie gravitated toward Phil, showing him her recent school photos on her phone. The art dealer's comments suggested an intimate knowledge of her life, her horseback riding lessons, her struggles with calculus, her dreams of studying in Europe. Photo time, Madeline called out, gathering the family near the garden trellis. Phil, dear, would you mind taking it? Actually, one of the guests offered. I can take it so Phil can be in the photo too. Ted watched as his family arranged themselves, with Phil somehow ending up between the twins, his arms around their shoulders as naturally as if he belonged there. The flash went off, capturing a moment that felt increasingly surreal. Oh, that's lovely, Madeline gushed, reviewing the photo. Phil, you must send this to Isabel. She'll love seeing how much the twins have grown. Isabel? Ted asked. My sister in Barcelona, Phil explained smoothly. She's quite fond of your family. Ted's mind raced. When had his family met Phil's sister? How had he missed these connections forming right under his nose? From across the garden, he caught sight of Carol deep in conversation with Kimberly, both of them throwing concerned glances his way. Whatever they were trying to tell him, he had a sinking feeling it was too late. As the party began to wind down, Ted found himself seeking solitude in his garden. The space had been Madeline's project when they first bought the house, but she'd lost interest once it was completed, leaving the maintenance to their gardeners. Now, it served as a quiet retreat from the dwindling celebration. He walked along the winding path, past carefully tended roses and ornamental shrubs, until he reached the Victorian-style trellis arch covered in climbing vines. The structure marked the entrance to a small meditation area, complete with a stone bench and a quietly burbling fountain. Voices drifted from the other side of the trellis, partially obscured by the sound of water. Ted recognized his children's voices and started to step forward to greet them, but something in their tone made him pause. "Dad's so stupid and dumb." Lance's voice carried clearly through the evening air, followed by a laugh that made Ted's blood run cold. It wasn't the typical teenage dismissal of a parent. There was real contempt in his son's voice. "I know, right?" Jeannie joined in. "He doesn't know you're our real father." Ted's hand gripped the trellis, his knuckles turning white. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as a third voice joined the conversation. Now, Ms. Niños." Phil's accent was thicker in this unguarded moment. "We must be patient. Everything is arranged." "But it's been forever," Jeannie whined. "Mom says once the inheritance comes through, we'll all move to your house in Europe. She's already packed most of her jewelry." "Your mother is enthusiastic," Phil chuckled. "But these things take time. The accounts must be properly prepared. The paperwork must be perfect. One small mistake could ruin everything." "I don't see why we have to wait," Lance grumbled. "It's not like he suspects anything. He's too busy with his precious company to notice what's happening in his own house." "That's exactly why we must be careful." Phil's voice took on a warning tone. "You're Ted. He may be blind to his personal life, but he's no fool when it comes to business. One wrong move could cost us everything." "Mom says he signed those new contracts last week," Jeannie offered. "The ones about the European expansion?" "Yes, and those will prove very useful," Phil replied. "But there are still details to arrange. The offshore accounts need time to mature. The property transfers must appear natural." "What about the company?" Lance asked. "Mom said something about a takeover?" "Leave that to the adults, Mijo. Roger Clements is handling that part of the arrangement. Soon enough, everything will belong to us, as it should have from the beginning." Ted stood frozen behind the trellis, his mind racing to process what he was hearing. 17 years of marriage, 16 years of fatherhood, all built on a foundation of lies. Every business deal, every family dinner, every moment of what he'd thought was happiness. It had all been part of an elaborate deception. "I still can't believe he bought that story about the art dealership," Lance snickered. "As if anyone would pay those prices for those ugly modern pieces." "Your father," Phil caught himself, "Ted, sees what he expects to see. It's a common weakness in men who build themselves up from nothing. They become so focused on proving themselves that they miss what's right in front of them. Like Mom's business trips to Barcelona?" Jeannie giggled. "Or all those art consultation meetings at the hotel downtown," Lance added. Phil's voice turned sharp. "Enough. Your mother and I have protected you from the uglier aspects of this situation, but never forget what's at stake. One careless word, one misplaced comment, and everything we've worked for could disappear." "Sorry, Papa," the twins chorused, the words striking Ted like a physical blow. "Now, go back to the party," Phil instructed. "Your mother will be looking for you. Remember, just a few more months, and we'll never have to pretend again." Ted heard footsteps on the garden path as his children. No, Phil's children, walked away, still giggling about their deception. He remained hidden until Phil's footsteps followed, moving in the opposite direction. When he was finally alone, Ted sank onto the stone bench, his legs no longer able to support him. The fountain bubbled cheerfully beside him, its sound now seeming to mock the destruction of his world. Everything made sense now. The interrupted conversations with Carol and Kimberly, Madeline's sudden interest in the European expansion projects, the twins' increasing distance from him. All the pieces were falling into place, forming a picture of betrayal so complete it took his breath away. He pulled out his phone, looking at the family photo from earlier that evening. They were all smiling at the camera, a perfect family portrait. But now he could see what he'd been missing. The way Madeline leaned slightly toward Phil, the natural way the twins fit under his arms, the subtle signs of conspiracy in their expressions. A message notification popped up on his screen, Kimberly trying one last time to warn him. Below it was an email from Roger Clements, his supposed colleague, probably containing another piece of the trap they were laying for him. Ted stood slowly, slipping his phone back into his pocket. The garden path stretched before him, leading back to the party where his wife, his children, and the man who had stolen them continued to play their roles in this elaborate charade. The quiet rage building inside him was tempered by years of business experience. He'd built his empire from nothing once before. He could do it again, but this time, he'd make sure those who betrayed him lost everything in the process. As he emerged from the garden, Ted's face showed nothing of his inner turmoil. He joined a group of guests, laughing at their jokes and discussing business prospects as if his entire world hadn't just crumbled around him. After all, he had learned something valuable tonight. Sometimes the perfect lie wasn't the one you told others, but the one you told yourself. Across the yard, he caught Carol's eye and gave a slight nod. Whatever his friend and Kimberly had been trying to tell him, he already knew the worst of it. Now it was time to plan his countermove, and Ted Kinney hadn't become successful by playing defense. The party continued around him, crystal glasses clinking, music playing, and conversations flowing. On the surface, nothing had changed. But beneath the perfect facade, the first cracks had appeared, and Ted knew that when the breaking finally came, it would shatter everything in its path. The morning after his 20th wedding anniversary party, Ted Kinney sat in his home office, staring at the family portrait on his desk. The first rays of sunrise filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the room. He hadn't slept. How could he, after what he'd discovered? The sound of Madeline's soft breathing drifted from their bedroom down the hall. She had no idea he'd spent the night reviewing old photos, financial statements, and correspondence, seeing them all with new eyes. His phone buzzed. "Carol, I'm coming over," his friend said without preamble. "And I'm bringing someone you need to meet." 30 minutes later, Carol arrived with a man who looked more like an accountant than a private investigator. Average height, average build, unremarkable features. The kind of person your eyes would slide right past in a crowd. "Ted Kinney, meet Darren Brown." Carol made the introduction in Ted's study. "He's the best in the business at uncovering things people want to keep hidden." Darren set his briefcase on Ted's desk. "Mr. Lancaster has filled me in on the situation. Before we proceed, I need to know. Are you absolutely certain you want to know everything? Some truths can't be unknown once they're revealed." Ted's laugh was hollow. "I heard my children call another man Papa last night. I think we're past the point of protecting my feelings." "Fair enough." Darren opened his briefcase. "I've already done preliminary research based on Mr. Lancaster's concerns. Your wife's travel patterns over the past 17 years show regular trips to Barcelona, often coinciding with school holidays or business conferences you couldn't attend." 17 years, Ted muttered. "The twins are 16. "Yes," Darren nodded. "And there's more. Your children's last physical examination included routine blood work. With the right access, those samples could be repurposed for DNA testing." Carol leaned forward. "Is that legal?" "Let's say it falls into a gray area," Darren replied. "The question is, do you want to know?" Ted stood, walking to his window. Below, he could see the remains of last night's party being cleared away. A catering truck was pulling out of the driveway, and gardeners were collecting the strings of lights from the trees. "Do it," he said without turning around. "I want proof of everything, the affairs, the business dealings, all of it. Leave no stone unturned." "It will take time," Darren cautioned, "and it won't be cheap. Money is no object." Ted finally turned back to face them. "But time might be. Based on what I overheard last night, they're planning something big. I'll need access to your home and office computers," Darren said, pulling out a small device. "This will mirror their hard drives without leaving a trace. And I'll need your authorization to place surveillance." A knock at the study door interrupted him. Ted quickly signaled Darren to pack away his equipment. "Come in," he called, keeping his voice casual. Madeline entered, still in her silk robe, looking fresh despite the early hour. "Darling, I thought I heard voices." "Carol, what brings you here so early? And who's this?" "Dave Brown," Darren answered smoothly, extending his hand. "I'm with the Contractors Association. We were just discussing the new European development project." Of course, Madeline's smile was perfect, practiced. "Would anyone like coffee? I can have Rosa bring some up." "No need," Carol stood. "We were just leaving." "Ted, we'll continue this discussion at the office." After they left, Madeline wrapped her arms around Ted from behind. "You worked so hard on the party, darling. You should have slept in." Ted forced himself to return her embrace, remembering the jewelry she'd already packed, the plans she'd already made. "You know me. Always working." Speaking of work, she pulled back slightly. "Phil mentioned he might stop by the office today. Something about those investment papers?" "Did he?" Ted kept his voice neutral. "I'll make sure Kimberly knows to expect him." "Oh, don't bother Kimberly with it. I can handle all the arrangements." Of course you can, Ted thought. The next few weeks passed in a blur of secret meetings and revelations. Darren's reports arrived daily, each one worse than the last. Email exchanges between Madeline and Phil spanning nearly 2 decades. Offshore account transfers disguised as art purchases. Meeting records with Roger Clements, Ted's biggest competitor, outlining plans for a hostile takeover. The DNA results arrived on a Tuesday morning. Ted stared at the numbers and charts that proved what he'd already known in his heart. The twins were not his children. He was reviewing the latest batch of documents in his office when Kimberly finally managed to corner him alone. She closed the door behind her, her usual professional demeanor cracking with urgency. "Mr. Kinney, I've been trying to tell you. Mrs. Kinney has been copying company documents. She's been meeting with Roger Clements from our rival firm." Ted looked up at his loyal secretary. How many times had she tried to warn him? How many signals had he missed? "I know, Kimberly." He smiled grimly. "And I know about the planned hostile takeover too." Kimberly sank into the chair across from his desk. "How long have you known?" "Since the anniversary party." Ted passed her one of Darren's reports. "They're planning to strip the company assets, transfer everything to offshore accounts, and leave me with nothing but debt and federal investigations." "Those bastards," Kimberly whispered, scanning the documents. "What are you going to do?" "What I do best," Ted replied. "Build something new from the ground up. But first, I'm going to need your help." The law office of Jerry Shannon and Associates occupied the entire top floor of a downtown Boston high-rise. Ted sat in the conference room with Jerry Shannon and Carrie Douglas, his financial advisor, surrounded by stacks of documents and empty coffee cups. They'd been working through the night, methodically dismantling and rebuilding Ted's empire. "The company shares will be transferred to a new holding corporation," Jerry explained, pushing his wire-rimmed glasses up his nose. "Your personal assets will be moved to unreachable trusts. They won't get a dime." Carrie nodded, pulling up complex spreadsheets on her tablet. "I've arranged for the sale of your European properties. They'll close the day you leave. The timing has to be perfect. We can't tip our hand too early." "What about the twins' trust funds?" Ted asked, his voice tight. "Already dissolved," Carrie replied softly. "The money has been transferred to educational trusts for your employees' children. Legally, it's untouchable." Ted stood, walking to the window. Below, Boston's financial district was coming to life. Early morning workers hurrying through the streets like ants. "Ted," Jerry's voice was gentle. "Are you sure about this? These moves, they're permanent. Once we set this in motion, there's no going back." "They made their choice 17 years ago," Ted replied without turning around. "Now I'm making mine." "There's something else you should see," Carrie said, pulling out another file. "We've been tracking Phil Melendez's art dealings. They're not just a cover for his relationship with Madeline. They're part of an international money laundering operation. If this gets out—" "When?" Ted corrected her. "When this gets out. But not yet. First, we need to make sure everything's in place." The next few weeks required Oscar-worthy performances from Ted. He maintained his routine perfectly, playing the role of oblivious husband and businessman. He attended charity functions with Madeline, discussed summer plans with the twins, and reviewed investment proposals with Phil. Late at night, While Madeline slept, he photographed documents from her private files and copied the contents of her laptop. During business hours, he worked closely with Kimberly to document every suspicious transaction, every unauthorized document copy, every secret meeting. Mrs. Kinney called again. Kimberly reported one afternoon. She wants to know if you've reviewed the new contract from Roger Clement's firm. Ted smiled, thinking of the fake contracts Darren had helped him prepare. Tell her I'll look at it tonight. Oh, and Kimberly? Thank you for everything. Just promise me one thing, Mr. Kinney, she replied. When this all comes down, make sure they get what they deserve. Oh, they will, Ted assured her. They definitely will. The final piece of Ted's plan came together over dinner at an exclusive restaurant in downtown Boston. Isabel Castillo, a legitimate developer from Madrid, sat across from him, reviewing the contracts for what would become the biggest deal of his career. At least, that's what Madeline would be led to believe. Everything appears to be in order, Mr. Kinney, Isabel said in perfect English. Though I must admit, your terms are unusually generous. Call it an investment in the future, Ted replied, signing the contracts with a flourish. And please call me Ted. Later that evening, he presented the deal to Madeline over dinner in their formal dining room. The twins were out with friends, or with Phil, he suspected, leaving them alone in the massive house. It's a 2-year commitment minimum, he explained, watching her reaction carefully. But the profits will set us up for life. Madeline's eyes lit up exactly as he'd expected. The twins could attend school in Europe. I'll start looking at houses. Actually, Ted interrupted, taking a sip of wine to hide his expression, I think you should stay here, manage things. Phil can help with any art acquisitions for the new properties, but surely the children need to finish their education here, Ted said firmly. Besides, someone needs to oversee the company's domestic operations. Who better than you? He watched the calculations play out behind her eyes. 2 years of freedom to operate without his interference. 2 years to complete whatever scheme she and Phil had concocted. Of course, darling, she finally replied, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. You're absolutely right. The children's education should come first. Ted squeezed back, thinking of the documents waiting in Carol's safe. I knew you'd understand. After all, family is everything, isn't it? That night, as Madeline slept beside him, Ted sent a series of encrypted messages from a burner phone. The pieces were all in place, Darren's evidence compiled and verified, Carrie's financial transfers arranged, Jerry's legal documents prepared, and Isabel's role in the deception secured. Soon, very soon, the perfect lie they'd built would come crashing down. But first, Ted had one more role to play. The trusting husband, going off to build a better future for his family. The irony almost made him laugh. Ted sat in Dawn Harper's nondescript office in a quiet suburb of Boston, watching the former intelligence operative type rapidly on multiple screens. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, building his new life piece by digital piece. Your cryptocurrency accounts are set up, Dawn said, not looking away from her monitors. I've distributed the funds across multiple wallets using different blockchain networks. Even if they somehow trace one, they'll never find them all. And the identities? Ted asked, examining the passports spread before him. Each bore his photo but with subtle differences, different haircuts, different glasses, different names. Michael Chen, Canadian businessman. James Foster, British consultant. Robert Nash, Australian investor. Dawn pointed to each passport in turn. Each identity has a complete digital footprint going back 15 years. Tax records, credit history, social media presence. Everything needed to withstand scrutiny. Darren Brown, who had recommended Dawn's services, stood by the window keeping watch. The documents you requested are ready too. Full dossiers on Phil's art fraud operation, Madeline's involvement, the planned hostile takeover, everything. Ted picked up one of the passports, feeling its weight. How long before they realized they're fake? Dawn's laugh was sharp. Mr. Kinney, these aren't fake. They're real passports, issued by real governments, backed by real documentation. The only fake thing is the name attached to them. A knock at the door made them all tense, but it was just Carol arriving for the final briefing. Ted's friend and business partner looked exhausted. The past few weeks of preparation had taken their toll on everyone. Ted handed him a USB drive. This contains everything: proof of their affairs, the embezzlement attempts, Phil's criminal record in Europe. Release it to the authorities in exactly 1 month. Carol turned the small device over in his hands, his expression grim. The company shares? Already transferred to the employee's trust. You're the new CEO. Ted smiled at his friend's surprised look. Who better to lead them? You helped build this company as much as I did. The timing has to be perfect, Dawn interrupted, still focused on her screens. The property sales, the account transfers, the document releases. Everything has to happen in the right sequence. Walk me through it one more time, Ted requested, needing to be certain every detail was perfect. Dawn pulled up a timeline on her main screen. At 9 a.m. tomorrow, you leave for your business trip to Spain. At 10 a.m., you actually board a different flight under one of your new identities. By noon, the property sales will close automatically. At 1 p.m., the first round of fund transfers begins. Meanwhile, Darren continued, Madeline and the twins will be busy packing for their supposed summer trip to Barcelona. They won't notice anything until it's too late. Kimberly has her instructions, Carol added. She'll execute the final phase of document distribution once I give the signal. SEC, FBI, major news outlets. They'll all receive the evidence simultaneously. Ted stood, walking to the window. Somewhere across the city, his family. No, not his family anymore, was probably having dinner, making plans for a future that would never come. One last thing, Dawn said, her tone serious. Once this starts, there's no going back. No contact with anyone from your old life, no matter what. Are you absolutely sure about this? Ted thought about the twins calling Phil Papa, about Madeline's years of lies, about the planned betrayal that would have left him penniless and alone. I'm sure, he said quietly. They made their choice a long time ago. Now I'm making mine. The morning of Ted's departure dawned bright and clear. He stood in his bedroom, adjusting his tie one last time, playing the role of businessman preparing for an important trip. Do you have everything you need? Madeline asked, helping him with his cufflinks. The ones she'd given him for their 10th anniversary, before the lies had consumed everything. All set, Ted replied, allowing her to fuss over his appearance. Let her think he was still the same trusting fool. The car will be here in 20 minutes. I've been thinking, she said, smoothing his lapels. Perhaps the twins and I could join you in Spain sooner rather than later. They're so excited about spending summer in Barcelona. I bet they are, Ted thought, remembering the overheard conversation about Phil's house in Europe. Out loud, he said, let's see how the first few weeks go. I want to make sure everything's properly set up. Of course, darling. She kissed his cheek, and Ted marveled at her ability to maintain the act. I'll have the twins come say goodbye before you leave. Lance and Jeannie appeared as Ted was checking his briefcase one last time. They performed their expected roles perfectly, the dutiful children saying goodbye to their father. Bring us something from Spain, Dad, Jeannie said, hugging him quickly. Yeah, and take lots of pictures, Lance added, barely looking up from his phone. Ted hugged them both, wondering if they could feel how stiff and formal the embrace was. These children who had never been his, who had laughed at his ignorance behind his back. Be good for your mother, he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. The car arrived right on schedule, not his usual driver, but one arranged by Dawn. Ted kissed Madeline goodbye one last time, picked up his briefcase, and walked out of his life. As the car pulled away, he saw Madeline already on her phone, probably calling Phil with updates. The twins had already disappeared back inside, uninterested in watching their supposed father leave. The car didn't head to Logan International as expected. Instead, it took a series of carefully planned detours, eventually arriving at a private airfield where a different plane waited. Ted Kinney boarded a flight to Madrid. Michael Chun boarded a flight to Bangkok. Back in Boston, Madeline was already helping the twins pack for their summer in Barcelona. She hummed happily as she sorted through her jewelry, deciding what to take, unaware that her carefully planned future was dissolving with each passing hour. In her office at Kinney Construction, Kimberly sat at her computer, waiting for Carol's signal. Multiple emails were drafted, each containing carefully selected documents and evidence. The recipients included the SEC, FBI, and major news outlets. Her finger hovered over the send button, ready to execute the final phase of Ted's plan. 1 month later, Madeline Kinney's morning routine was interrupted by a loud pounding on the front door. She opened it to find federal agents with search warrants, and her world began to crumble. The morning paper lay on her designer coffee table, its headline screaming in bold type. Construction magnate's empire reveals massive fraud scheme. Below it, smaller headlines added to the devastation. Art dealer's money laundering operation exposed and corporate espionage plot uncovered. Lance stormed into the living room, waving his phone. "Mom, my tuition payment bounced. The school says I can't come back next semester." Before Madeline could respond, Jeannie rushed in from the garden. "My writing instructor just called. All my competition entries have been canceled. She says our checks were rejected." Madeline's own phone was buzzing constantly with notifications. Their assets were frozen. The houses, all of them, had been sold weeks ago. The company had been transferred to employee ownership. "This is impossible," she whispered, trying to access their accounts. Every password had been changed, every trust fund dissolved. Phil wasn't answering his phone. His art gallery was closed, a notice of federal investigation posted on the door. His house in Barcelona, the one they'd planned to escape to, had been seized by European authorities. The twins sat shell-shocked on the designer couch that probably wouldn't be theirs much longer. Their dreams of European luxury had evaporated like morning mist. No more private school, no more equestrian competitions, no more pretending to be part of Boston's elite. "How could he do this to us?" Lance demanded, his arrogance crumbling in the face of reality. "Do this to us?" Jeannie's laugh was hysterical. "We're the ones who betrayed him. We're the ones who—" She trailed off as federal agents began cataloging the home's contents. Madeline sank into her favorite armchair, the same one where she'd sat plotting with Phil all those years. The newspaper articles painted a damning picture: decades of fraud, money laundering through fake art sales, corporate espionage, planned hostile takeover. Every secret exposed, every lie revealed. Meanwhile, on a sunny beach in Thailand, Ted, now living as Michael Chen, sipped a cocktail and read the news on his tablet. His old life had burned to ashes, but from them, he'd built something new: freedom. His phone, a secure line known only to Carol, buzzed with a message. He opened it to find a series of news articles: Boston socialite and international art dealer indicted for fraud, and DNA scandal rocks private school as paternity questions emerge. Attached was a photo taken by one of Carol's contacts, Madeline being led into the federal building for questioning, her designer clothes and perfect makeup unable to hide her devastation. Behind her, Phil was being escorted in handcuffs, his sophisticated facade shattered. The twins, their parentage now public knowledge, faced their own crisis. Their friends had turned on them, their social media accounts flooded with mockery and disdain. The very society circles they'd hoped to dominate now shunned them completely. Ted closed his tablet and walked along the shore, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. The warm sand between his toes felt nothing like the manicured lawns of his Boston estate. The sound of waves replaced the noise of corporate boardrooms. A message from Dawn confirmed that his new identities remained secure, his cryptocurrency fortune untraceable. She'd kept her word. He'd vanished completely, leaving behind a perfectly executed plan that dismantled the lies his life had been built on. Carol's final update was brief. "It's done? They'll never recover from this." Ted typed back a simple response. "Good." He slipped the phone back into his pocket and continued his walk along the beach. Sometimes, the best revenge wasn't about violence or confrontation. Sometimes, it was simply about living well and letting karma handle the rest. The sun dipped below the horizon, taking with it the last remnants of Ted Kinney's old life. Tomorrow would bring a new day, a new identity, a new beginning. But for now, he simply walked along the shore, finally at peace with the knowledge that justice, in its own way, had been served. Epilogue. 5 years later. The Federal Correctional Institution in Danbury, Connecticut, was a far cry from the luxury Madeline Kinney had once known. Her designer clothes had been replaced by prison orange, her her spa treatments by strictly scheduled yard time. After 5 years, she still hadn't adjusted to the harsh fluorescent lighting that made her premature wrinkles more pronounced. "Visitor for you, Kinney," the guard announced, leading her to the visiting area. Jeannie sat at one of the metal tables, looking nothing like the privileged teenager she'd been. At 21, she wore simple clothes from a discount store, her once perfectly maintained hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. No more equestrian competitions or designer outfits. She worked as a receptionist at a local veterinary clinic, attending community college at night. "Hi, Mom," she said quietly, no longer the entitled child who had mocked the man she'd called father. "Darling." Madeline reached for her daughter's hands, but Jeannie kept them in her lap. "How's your brother?" "Still working construction in Nevada," Jeannie replied. "Entry-level stuff. Ironic, isn't it? He finally ended up in the family business, just not the way we planned." Lance had taken the fall harder than his sister. His dreams of attending an elite university had evaporated with their trust funds. The boy who once sneered at manual labor now spent his days doing exactly that, learning the trade from the ground up, just as Ted once had. And Madeline hesitated. "Your father? Which one?" Jeannie's laugh was bitter. "Ted? Nobody's heard from him in 5 years. He's gone, probably living his best life somewhere while we deal with this mess." "Or do you mean Phil? Still got 12 years left in federal prison, last I heard. The international money laundering charges really did him in." Phil Melendez, once the sophisticated art dealer from Barcelona, now resided in a maximum security facility. His international art fraud scheme had attracted attention from multiple governments. The man who had plotted to steal another's fortune had lost everything: his freedom, his reputation, and even his family. "Have you spoken to Carol lately?" Madeline asked, trying to change the subject. "Why would he speak to me? He's busy running the company. Successfully, I might add. They just opened their 5th international office." Jeannie's expression hardened. The employees' trust was the best thing that could have happened to them. "The stock value has tripled." Kimberly, or had been promoted to Chief Operations Officer, her loyalty and integrity rewarded. She'd implemented new transparency policies that made the company stronger than ever. The boardroom where Madeline had once plotted corporate espionage now hosted employee profit-sharing meetings. "I saw the Hendersons at the grocery store last week," Jeannie continued. "Remember them? They used to be at all your charity events." Mrs. Henderson turned down the aisle rather than face me. "Guess that's still happening after 5 years." Boston's elite social circles, which had once been Madeline's playground, now shunned any connection to the scandal. The charity boards she'd sat on, the social clubs she'd dominated, all had erased her name from their records. The society pages now tracked the rise of younger, more honest socialites. "Your trust fund," Madeline began, "was transferred to scholarship programs for employees' children." Jeannie cut her off. "I know. 3 kids are attending college now because of what used to be my horse-showing money. Good for them." The prestigious private school that Lance and Jeannie had attended now used their case in ethics seminars. Their former classmates had gone on to elite universities while they struggled to rebuild their lives from scratch. Meanwhile, across the world, a successful entrepreneur named Michael Chun had built a respectable consulting business in Thailand. His expertise helped small construction companies grow sustainably, his reputation for integrity drawing clients from across Southeast Asia. Few knew that Michael Chun had once been Ted Kinney, and those who did kept his secret. Carol visited occasionally on business trips, bringing news of Boston that he knew Ted still wanted to hear, despite everything. They never discussed the family that had betrayed him, focusing instead on the company's success and the positive changes their actions had brought about. Ted had found peace in his new life. His beachfront home was smaller than his Boston mansion, but filled with genuine friendships and honest relationships. He'd even started dating again, a local businesswoman who appreciated him for who he was, not what he owned. Dawn Harper had done her job well. Despite extensive investigations, no one had ever tracked down Ted Kinney or his fortune. The cryptocurrency wallets she'd established remained secure, their contents funding charitable works through untraceable donations. Ted had found that helping others anonymously brought more satisfaction than all his previous displays of wealth. Darren Brown still worked as a private investigator in Boston, his role in Ted's disappearance known to very few. He'd gained a reputation for exposing corporate fraud, his experience with the Kinney case making him particularly effective. Occasionally, he'd receive an anonymous tip that helped crack a case. The emails untraceable, but the writing style oddly familiar. Back in the prison visiting room, Madeline watched her daughter stand to leave. "Will you come again next month?" "I don't know, Mom. Between work and school. We'll see." Jeannie paused. "Lance asked me to tell you. He's using Dad's name now." Ted's name. Said it's a reminder to be a better person. After Jeannie left, Madeline returned to her cell, past the common room where a television played the local news. A story about Kinney Construction's latest charitable initiative caught her attention, a program providing construction training to underprivileged youth. She watched Carol Lancaster present the project, standing confidently where she had once expected Phil to stand. That night, in her narrow prison bed, Madeline dreamed of her old life, the parties, the plotting, the perfect lies. She woke to the reality of concrete walls and strict schedules, another day of consequences stretching before her. On the other side of the world, Ted sat in his beach house office, reviewing reports from his consulting business. A framed photo on his desk showed him with a group of local builders whose businesses he'd helped develop. Their success had become his redemption, their gratitude washing away the bitterness of his past. His phone buzzed, a message from Carol. "Just met your namesake. Lance is doing well in Nevada, working hard, learning the trade. He asks about you sometimes, through channels. Should I tell him anything?" Ted stared at the message for a long time before replying. "Tell him hard work and honesty build stronger foundations than quick schemes and lies. He'll understand eventually." The sun was setting over the ocean, painting the sky in colors no artist, certainly not Phil, could capture. Ted stepped onto his balcony, breathing in the salt air. His tablet showed news from Boston, another charity initiative from his old company, another success story from the employees' trust, another small piece of good growing from the ashes of betrayal. 5 years had changed everything, and nothing. The perfect lie had been exposed, its architects punished, its victims either redeemed or condemned by their own choices. Ted had lost a false family but gained a true purpose. His revenge had been complete, but his victory lay not in their downfall but in his own resurrection. As darkness settled over the beach, Ted raised a glass to the horizon.
"To karma," he whispered, "the great equalizer."
In prison cells and construction sites, in veterinary clinics and corner offices, in Boston's society gatherings and Thailand's business meetings, the ripples of one man's response to betrayal continued to spread. Some called it revenge, others called it justice, but Ted knew the truth. Sometimes the best revenge was simply living well and letting time reveal the consequences of each person's choices. The perfect lie had crumbled, but from its ruins, various truths had emerged. Some bitter, some sweet, all transformative. In the end, everyone had received exactly what they had earned. No more, no less. And perhaps that was the greatest justice of all. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
To cheat or not to cheat on my wife? This is the question I now face. For the past 6.5 years, my life has been nothing short of a living hell. Then, 2 women from my past re-entered my life, forcing me to reconsider whether the vows I took are worth enduring this agony. My wife and I have been married for 20 years, and we have a 19-year-old daughter, Grace. Last year, she married her high school sweetheart, Sam Marlowe. Watching their courtship unfold reminded me of how Clara and I were in the beginning. I can only hope their marriage doesn't end up like ours. Let me start at the beginning, and perhaps I can explain the dilemma I'm facing. My name is Jack Stone, and I'm 40 years old. I graduated from high school at 16, turning 17 just before starting college. During my sophomore year, I secured an internship at a local architectural firm, focusing on design work and drafting with C80. Back then, AutoCAD was still in its early stages. My job was to learn the system thoroughly and then teach the other architects. My first project, a 3-bedroom house plan, took 3 months as I navigated the intricacies of the C80 system. The second plan took a month, and by the third project, I had it down to 2 weeks. From that point on, I hit my stride. I continued my full-time studies and work, completing my architectural degree in just over 3 years. In high school, I met Clara Wood, the woman who would become my wife. We were both seniors. I was 16, and she was 17. I asked her to the St. Patrick's Day dance, and to my surprise, she said yes. At the time, I was a lanky, awkward kid, 5 feet 10 inches and barely 115 pounds. Clara, on the other hand, was stunning. At 5 feet 6 inches and about 110 pounds, she had a striking figure and auburn hair that fell a few inches past her shoulders. Her hazel eyes could flash green or blue, depending on her mood. We dated for the rest of our senior year and into college, though our schedules rarely aligned. 2 months before graduation, we had a scare. Clara thought she might be pregnant. Although she was on birth control, she missed 2 periods. The fear pushed us to the brink, but a doctor assured her that such irregularities could happen. That scare led us to marry shortly after graduation. I began working full-time at the architectural firm where I'd interned. 5 years later, I earned my professional engineer, PE, certification. 10 years after that, I became the lead architect at the firm, Perry and Associates, as the other architects either retired or left to start their own businesses. Eventually, Steve Perry, the founder, sold the company to me when his children chose other paths. Today, I run the firm with 3 talented young architects under me, taking on design work occasionally while managing the business. Now, here I am, questioning the choices I made and wondering where I go from here. Clara and I had a daughter during our marriage, Grace Alice Stone. She was born less than a year after we married. She was the apple of my eye, and we both showered her with love. My marriage was great for the next 14 years. We had an active and varied sex life. We loved each other madly, and I tried to give Clara and Grace everything they would ask for if we could afford it. We found out after Grace was born that we could not have any more children. Clara miscarried twice after Grace was born. It all stemmed back to when she had those problems with the missed periods. Something in her uterus was wrong or twisted or something. I never actually got a straight answer from the doctor about that. So we went on with life after I got snipped. Life was good until suddenly, just before Clara's 35th birthday, she started complaining about not feeling well, or being tired, or something, whenever I wanted sex. From that day forward, sex stopped dead. Nothing. No playing around. Nothing. Well, I really loved Clara, and so I settled for Rosie and her 5 sisters. I figured it would only be a temporary problem. We made an appointment with her OB/GYN doctor, and we tried to see if there was a problem causing it, because the last 3 times we had made love she complained it hurt her during intercourse. We tried several doctors, even a couple of psychiatrists, to see if there was a problem in her mind to make her think there was a medical problem. After a year, I gave up hope of ever having a sexual relationship with my wife again. During that year, things changed at home. Drastic changes happened after we exhausted our pleas for answers. Clara quit work. She really didn't need to work by now, as I was quite successful. I made good money building custom homes and working with several developers for starter homes and mid-range homes, too. I was bringing in about $165K a year and things were good on that front. Grace didn't know about the problems Clara and I were having regarding sex, but she did notice when Clara quit her job and just stayed home. She would go to bed about 9 or 10 in the evening and then sleep the clock around. She would get up, eat a meal, and then read a book and or watch TV. She ate all the time, and she gained almost 90 pounds over the next few years, and she just looked like hell. Her shiny hair now looked terrible. Yeah, it was clean about every 3 days, but her hair had no luster anymore. Then she cut it short and started wearing house dresses like a muumuu or a robe all day. She didn't even cook anymore. I did the cooking for suppers and Grace had to make her own breakfast if she wanted to eat. I tried talking to Clara, but I got nowhere. She just wouldn't talk to me, or she would say, "Everything is fine. Now leave me alone." To make a long, sad story short, after 4 more years of this hell, I found an outlet for my frustrations. Grace had graduated high school and was going to college. There was nothing at home for me, so I worked late quite a bit. It's not like I was welcomed at home. I would come in from work and say hi to my wife, and she would grunt an answer. She might say hi back, but her nose was in a book, or she was intent on watching something on the TV. I would fix us a microwave dinner, and then I would go running to stay in shape. I hated those meals, but they were quick and easy, and anything to get me out of that miserable environment was fine by me. Running became my sexual outlet, for now, except for occasional frantic self-pleasing sessions in the shower. Isabel Fairfield was a girl who lived next door to me when I was growing up. We saw each other at the grocery store one night, and we talked and tried to catch up. It was the first time I had seen her since I graduated high school. She was divorced now, and she was lonely. She had a sad story to tell. and wanted to know if we could talk over coffee sometime. I told her that I would meet her at the local diner, up the road from the grocery store, the next night. The old railcar diner was actually 3 train cars that used to be boxcars. Someone had brought them in, and had then made them into a U-shaped diner. The center of the U was enclosed, and was the kitchen. The dining area was inside the boxcars. They had cut windows and had insulated the cars to make a really fine diner. The food was good, and the coffee and pie were great. They had old railroad signs and advertising on the walls and lanterns and signal flags, and all that stuff to make it homey and stylish. Isabel Waring, née Fairfield, was a year behind me in school, but a great tomboy. Tommy Southern, Daniel Algren, Isabel and I were the terrors of the neighborhood when we were about 10 to 14. When I was 12, I changed from being the carefree guy I was, to someone who knew that schooling was going to be very important to me. I went from 5th to 7th grade and then skipped 8th as well. But I still palled around with the neighbor kids until I gained high school. Then I was the nerdy kid, who left the rest behind as I did nothing but study. I met Isabel Thursday night after my run and we sat and talked old times and really had a great evening together. It was like I really missed the companionship that I lost when Clara changed into a hermit. We closed the place at 9 p.m., and Isabel suggested that we meet at my place or hers as the chairs would have to be more comfortable than the ones we had been sitting on all evening. I explained some about my home life, and she suggested her home instead, as she lived only 3 blocks away. I said if she didn't mind a sweaty visitor, I could stop by after my nightly run. But, Jack, I normally run in the mornings at about 6. Maybe you can run with me, and we can talk as we go along. How does that sound? Isabel, that sounds terrific. What's your address? I'll meet you there at 6. She wrote her address down for me, and I recognized the number as the house on the corner 2 streets over from ours. It had the gates at the drive and a large front lawn. The house was a 2-story clapboard house with 2 columns in front that hold up the balcony above the front door. The house was huge, probably over 4,000 square feet. I thought nothing of the invitation as it was just running and catching up. There was nothing overt in that, which I should look out for. We started a routine of running in the morning, and then we stopped at her place for a quick coffee. Before a month was up, we were meeting in the evenings too. For the company, more than anything else. By then, Isabel had wormed out of me my whole home life environment and my lack of a sex life. I did say that I took my vows very seriously. However, she did make an offer I had a hard time denying. Jack, since our former president once debated the definition of certain acts, would you consider helping me improve my conversational skills? It could even be a 2-way exchange if you were open to it, though no obligation. It would give me something to focus on and help me avoid the pitfalls many divorcees face, like spending too much time in bars trying to escape their reality. Please take some time to think about this offer before giving me an answer. After a couple of months, I agreed to meet Isabel regularly at her home for these sessions. It seemed to provide a welcome distraction from my own challenging situation at home, and it helped Isabel avoid falling into unhealthy habits. These meetings also made it a bit easier for me to manage Clara's unpredictable moods and tendency to isolate herself. My interactions with Isabel continued for about 6 months before I began to feel guilty about betraying my wife. But was it truly betrayal? To me, it felt more like an intimate connection rather than a full transgression. When I went to bed each night with Clara snoring beside me, I argued with myself whether or not I was really cheating her out of anything. I was achieving something she was cheating me out of: sexual love. Did I love Isabel? No. I may have liked her a lot, but love? No. Did I still love Clara? Yes, of course I did. I just didn't like her a whole lot, right now. But that was different. She was sick. I didn't know if it was physical or mental, but she was definitely sick. I mean, I had tried for just over a year to try to find out what was wrong with her, but to no avail. She wasn't incapacitated and therefore in need of constant care. She could care for herself. I mean, look at her. She was huge. So I knew she could feed herself and take care of bodily functions by herself. I never found her to stink, so she had to bathe. But that is where all semblance of a Clara being a wife ended. We didn't interact on any level. We were strangers in our own home. Clara had her activities and her life, and I had mine. I went to work, and I exercised. I bought what was on the list of items needed that Clara left on the counter or the refrigerator, and I put up with the slovenly person who had been my wife. So, was I the bad guy who cheated, or was she the one who cheated me out of a proper life of being married? It got to the point that I just stopped caring anymore. I went on with my life, and I let her get on with hers. I just stopped looking at her. I stopped talking to her except when she directly asked me a question, which was very rare. I pretty much ignored my wife, just like she ignored me. Life went on, endlessly boring, except for my time with Isabel. I was at the point I was going to file for divorce on the grounds of abandonment. I mean, that was what Clara had done to me. She had thrown me to the side and abandoned me, even though we lived in the same house and slept in the same bed. I was discussing it with Isabel when I came to the conclusion that I had to do something, even if it was as drastic as divorce. Isabel surprised me by asking me to hold off for 3 months. She said, "Jack, I know you want this now, but give it a little while longer and make sure this is what you really want. Once you start down that path, there's no turning back." Look at me and my situation. I sometimes think I should have stuck in there a little longer and given Ray a chance to discover that I was bored with him and our life together. I know I should have confronted him with my feelings, but I was hurt that he couldn't or wouldn't see what was happening to us. We were much like you and Clara, except he was the one ignoring me. He was working too much, staying away too long, and not taking any vacations. It became just too much, so I left. Once he realized I was gone, it was too late to try to patch things up. Too much had been said that hurt both of us. That is one of the reasons I won't let you stay very long. I know if you stayed the night, that sometime during the night, you or I would stop being friends trying to help each other out. We would become lovers, and that would ruin your marriage, such as it is. But Isabel, there is no marriage for me. We are just two people living in the same house. There is no love in either direction anymore. Why should I try to keep it going when it appears that Clara has given up on me and our marriage? Okay, then do this. Try to talk to her and let her know how you feel. Tell her you are thinking about a divorce. Put the ball in her court for a change. See if she makes an effort. If nothing happens in a week, then leave. Move in here or somewhere and then wait a month. If she doesn't change or want you back, then I say go ahead with the divorce. Do you always argue with your lovers like this? I asked laughingly. No, Jack. I only argue with the cute, stubborn ones that I want all for myself, to have forever. I went home that night, and Clara was still up reading. She was almost finished with the book she was reading. I waited until she finished and then stood in front of her and said my piece. "Clara, I really need to talk to you about our marriage. Please pay close attention to what I have to say, okay?" I got a nod, so I continued, "Clara, I'm not happy with the way things have gone on now for the last 6 years. You quit a job that I thought you really liked. You became a hermit in this house, with you sleeping all the time and reading your books. You have gotten fat and sloppy about your appearance, and generally you have ignored me and our daughter until she was forced to move out. I am giving you a week to recognize where we are in our relationship. If after that week, no changes are made, I am going to seek a divorce. I want some happiness back in my life, whether it is with you or with someone else. It is up to you now. Think this over and give me an answer within 1 week or I start proceedings. Do you understand what I have said?" "I understand perfectly. You are tired of me, and you found some new woman that you are doing. So, go have your fling. You will eventually come back to me, because you love me. No man in his right mind would let his wife do what you have put up with for the last 6 years if he didn't love her. So if you need to go screw somebody, go. But don't come crawling back to me and ask forgiveness, because I won't tolerate a cheating husband. Good night. I'm going to bed." Clara bumped me out of her way and went into the bedroom. I went into mine, well, into the spare room. I had been living in it for the past month, because Clara's snoring was getting worse. I could no longer sleep in that bed with her. I couldn't lay there next to what my wife had become. I couldn't believe what I heard from out of her mouth. She felt like she was the injured party here. Unbelievable. I did or said nothing for a week. Then I rented a box truck and I moved out. I moved into Isabel's house. I think it was actually the servants' quarters. It was at the back of the house and had its own entrance. I was there for almost 3 months when I received a phone call at work. "Perry and Associates, this is Jack. Can I help you?" "Daddy, what is going on?" "Mom is frantic. She hasn't seen you or heard from you for over a week now. What happened?" "I thought you guys were kinda okay. Grace, I moved into your old room over 4 months ago, and I moved my stuff out 3 months ago. Your mother never even knew I left. I told her I had to leave to keep my sanity, and she told me to go screw my 304, and then see if she would take me back. Honey, I have not had a woman, any woman, in over 6 years, least of all, your mother. You noticed when she turned 35 she changed. Well, she has not done anything different since you left home. She is still like she was. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to leave her before I gave up and shot myself for her, or maybe both of us. With you away at school, I thought you would find out from her that I left. Grace, I'm so sorry that you had to find out this way. I have tried so many times to call you, but I really didn't know what to say, or even how to bring the subject up. I still love the woman I married. But that woman, in that house, is not her. That woman is sponging off my generosity, but not for much longer. I'm going to talk to my lawyer today. In fact, I need to get going if I'm going to make the appointment. I'll call you tonight for sure, honey. Remember, I love you, Grace. I hung up and let Ella, my secretary, know where I was headed and roughly how long I would be gone. I left our building and walked the 2 blocks to Elliot Mason's office at Dean, Koenig, Blackwood, and Mason. Samuel Dean was my company lawyer. Liam Koenig did civil law. Sanders Blackwood did criminal law, and Elliot was for family law. I've known all 4 of them since grade school. I walked into Elliot's office 5 minutes early and was asked to wait as he had a client already. I waited, and soon Elliot came out with a young lady in tears. He had his secretary take her to the restroom to clean up. I was escorted into his office and Elliot started out with, "Jack, so good to see you, but I suppose not under these circumstances. You said something about wanting a divorce, right?" "Right, Elliot. I have some questions first, so we can figure out what grounds we are going to file under. Can I prove that my wife abandoned me 6 years ago, even though we still lived in the same house, and until 4 months ago we slept in the same bed?" "Jack, what?" "Abandonment means that she left you alone, and she left the area. Now how can she abandon you and still live in the same house? You have me very confused." So I related the whole thing, from when she turned 35 until this latest development that I had found out from my daughter's call. I neglected to tell him where I lived now, and what Isabel and I had done over the last 6 months or so. Elliot thought, and then went to his bookcase along one whole wall and started thumbing through one book after another, stopping to read a section then going on. He finally sat back down and said, "Jack, that might be a tough sell. But if Clara would admit that no sex took place for those years, and we had before and after pictures of the house and her, then I think we just might get it to work. It would be much easier to file for irreconcilable differences. That is something we can prove with no problems. But why the abandonment? Elliot, for just over 6 years I lived in a house that was not a home. She did her thing and left me to do mine. I tried for almost a year to find out what happened to suddenly switch her from a loving sexual being to a nothing in the space of a week. After seeing so many doctors that I couldn't count them anymore, I gave up and resigned myself to the fate I was dealt. But lately I have come to the conclusion that I don't want that life anymore, or whatever that was. It was certainly not living. It was, at best, existing. I've met a woman who I like being with. She makes me happy, and she wants me. We have not had intercourse. I do live in her home, but in the servants' quarters at the back of the house. It is a separate quarters with a private entrance, while still being a part of the house. I have my key, and she has hers, but they are not the same. We eat together and talk, but she goes to her bedroom, and I go to mine. We share some of the expenses, like food and utilities, but that is all. I suppose I could find another place, but it's close to our house, so if Clara were to need me I could come right away, but she has never even noticed if I was there or not. This latest is a prime example. Clara frantically calls our daughter and says I haven't been home for a week, but I've been gone for over 3 months. I even moved into the spare room a month before that. So that is why I say abandonment. Jack, that is some problem, and I can see where you are going with that. I'm just saying that may not be enough grounds for a judge to act on it. Are you trying to send a message to Clara? Is that why you are asking for the grounds you want? Yes, Elliot, that is a part of it, but the other part one think is frustration and feeling that I was abandoned by her alienation of me, even though I was still there. So what's next? Jack, we need to discuss the split. Do we go with 50-50, or is there some property or assets that you or she had before the marriage? Elliot, I would like a clean split up to 6 years ago. Then nothing for her, that was an increase in my assets. Prior to that, Clara worked. She contributed in everything. Since then it has been take, and take some more from me. Jack, those are some strange conditions, but let me see what I can work out. I'll get back with you in a couple of days at most. We can serve Clara with papers as soon as you sign the agreement with the terms, and we get the judge to accept the petition. That sounds great, Elliot. Here is a check for my part in this. I gave Elliot a check for $3,000 and left. I walked back to work. Ella had a message from my wife. She was a little surprised, as in the 5 years she worked for me, I had never received a call from her. I said I would call her as soon as I could and went into my office and called Isabel. Isabel, I did it. I filed today. Would you believe Clara only thought I had been gone about a week? I'll see you tonight. Do I bring supper, or are you going to cook? I think something special is the order of the day. It will be a surprise. See you later, Jack. I checked on a couple of projects we were working on and then drove out to a site where we were building a lodge for the Masons. Then I drove over to the $500,000 home of some golf pro. We were getting ready for the interior work only now. He should be ready to move in about a month. He had a lot of upgrades he wanted for this house, which would take some time to complete. After that, it was time to go home. what I called home now. I walked in the back door, stripped down, and took a shower. Then I put on some clean slacks and a polo shirt, and I sat down and called Clara. Clara, why did you call me at work? You haven't called me at work since you quit working. What do you need? Jack, why haven't you come home for over a week? Are you out somewhere at a new site? No, Clara, I left our house over 3 months ago. I came in one day, and you were sleeping, as usual. I packed up all my stuff and left. It couldn't have been that long ago. You were here just last week. I remember you fixed that special mac and cheese thing I like. I know that was last week, right? No, Kath. That was 3 months ago, when I told you I was leaving, and that I would move out the next morning. Clara, you have been somewhere else for over 6 years, and I got tired of it. So I left. I started divorce proceedings today. You should get served sometime later this week. I'm going to leave the house to you, and half of the money I have invested, and half the money that the business is worth, but that's it. Honey, you need help. If you don't seek it out soon, I don't know what is going to happen to you. Please call someone and get help. Jack, what are you saying? I only quit my job 6 months ago. How can you say it was 6 years? It's like April of 2005, right? No, Clara, it is April of 2012. Grace is in college over in Louisiana. You called her today, panicking because I wasn't home. Please talk to someone. You need help. Goodbye, Kath. I heard crying and some swear words as I hung up the phone, but I had to steel myself to be strong. This was all for the better, right? God, I sure hope so. Isabel found me in my recliner sobbing uncontrollably. I prayed that I had done the right thing by Clara. I hoped that she would seek help now. Isabel crawled into my lap and hugged me and cried with me. She tried to find out what was wrong and then soothe my fears and told me this was all for the best, especially for Clara. I did manage to call Grace later that evening and explain to her what I had done. Well, Clara protested the divorce, and she found a sympathetic ear from the judge. He gave her 6 months to change her life around. If she did not change, then the divorce would be granted as final. I had to move out of Isabel's house and find my own place. I stored most of my big furniture at her house, and I found a small apartment close to work. I then poured myself into my work. I even quit going over to Isabel's house. I was getting ready to go back to court when I received a phone call from Isabel. She had this friend that wanted to go out with me. She knew the divorce wasn't final, but she was only here for a little while, and then she was going back to the West Coast. She did tell me that one thing I must not do was to remove the lady's mask. She had just had some plastic surgery done on her face due to some burns as a child. When Isabel said that, I thought I knew who she was talking about. That would have been Sophia Trufant. She had some hot grease spattered on her face when she was about 10. Her face was pretty bad for a lot of years. She had tried to use makeup, but it couldn't hide everything. It seemed that recently she had found someone here that said they could fix her up like new again. I hadn't seen her since high school, and she was 2 years behind me. I always treated her nicely, as did Tommy and Daniel. We were sympathetic to her problem, and I think she had a schoolgirl crush on all 3 of us. I told Isabel that I would go out with her after my divorce was final, but she insisted that the woman would be gone by then, so it had to be this Saturday evening. I finally relented. I could always talk old times with her. Saturday came and I met Sophia at Isabel's house. She was about the same build as what my wife, Clara, used to be. Her voice was kind of raspy. She said it was due to the surgeries. I took her to Red Lobster, as she said she missed California seafood. I hoped this lived up to that hype. I did most of the talking, but she steered the conversation mostly by asking questions about Clara and my life now. I said, well, I should find out next week if Clara got any help. We go back to court on Tuesday to see if she is better now. I think if she really tried to change back to who she was once before, I would maybe try again. But if not, then no way. I couldn't put up with another 6 months like the last 6.5 years have been. Jack, are you certain you would stick with her if she did change? Sophia, I really don't know. I would have to see her and talk to her again and see if the love I had for her is still there. There is still love in my heart for the girl I married, but I don't think I could ever love the woman she has become. It was just too trying on me. Isabel told me about you and Clara soon after she met you again. She said that even though you both wanted to be together, you would not cross a line. That shows the kind of love you had for her. Yeah, maybe so, but I think I love Isabel now. If Clara hasn't changed, I will hope that Isabel would let me into her heart. Even if Clara has changed, I will really have to search in my heart to see if I can find the strength to forgive her for all those long, lonely years. It's hard to forget the loneliness when the person you have loved for so long is still there in the flesh, but their mind is somewhere else. Then, too, when she just gave up and let her body go, that hurt too. I'm not saying I loved her any less because of that, but it certainly didn't help along with the blankness that came with it. Sophia, I think that is enough about Clara. Can we talk about you? We finished the meal and I took her back to Isabel's house. She wanted a kiss goodnight, so I held her and started a chaste kiss in the millivolt scale. What came back to me was in the megawatt scale and could have powered half the town. I got a reaction I hadn't felt in quite some time. It reminded me of the kisses I got as a teenager back when Clara and I first got together. I held her close, feeling the tension between us as I brushed against her. Then, gathering myself, I stepped back and said I needed to leave before crossing a line I had promised never to cross, betraying my wife. Isabel called me when I got home and asked how the date went. Isabel, that woman reminds me so much of the girl that I married that if she stays around here very long, she is going to have to fight me off with a bullwhip and chair. I couldn't believe that kiss at the door. I almost broke my wedding vows right there on your front porch. I hope she wants to stick around for a few days till after my court date. If she will, unless Clara has changed dramatically, that woman and I have a date with destiny. Tell her that and see what she says. I could hear a muffled conversation and then Isabel was back and said, Jack, she says that she will be right here for you. She is going to change her flight back to Friday. So did you want to go out tomorrow night too? Well, tell her if I went out with her tomorrow night or actually any night before my divorce is final, then Clara would have some ammunition to haul me up for adultery. So you just have her stay away from me until afterwards, okay? And Isabel, once divorced, you and me are long overdue for a whole weekend of playing hide the sausage. That I can promise you. I showed up for the hearing bright and early Tuesday at 8:15 a.m. Elliot was there and another guy at the table across from us. Then several women came in. Isabel was among them, and someone else was, too. It looked like 4 people came in then. Isabel was one. One kind looked like Sophia, and the third one was hidden by the other 2. Isabel came and sat behind me, and the other 3 sat over behind the other lawyer. Just before the judge came in, the one I couldn't see too plain came up to the table with the lawyer. The judge came in, and we all stood and then sat down. The judge called my name and my lawyer, and I said, present. Then Clara's name was called, and the woman at the table stood up and said, here. Here we go, I thought. The judge called up Clara, and she came up to the bench and removed her trench coat, and I about fell off the chair. That was Sophia's dress that she wore when she went out with me. I whispered to Elliot what I knew. Objection, Your Honor, but that woman is not Clara Stone. We believe she is in reality Sophia Trufant. The woman turned around and I fainted. The body might have been who I was with on Saturday night, but the face was Clara's. Once I came back to the living world, Clara said, with a raspy voice, thank you for the compliment, Jack, but I am the real Clara Stone. Her voice went back to its normal timbre. I went to a clinic that Isabel and Sophia knew about, out on the coast. They found my problem was hormone imbalances. Once that was corrected, I went on a special diet and exercised like a mad woman. I wanted my man back. We could have tried to break our wedding vows on Isabel's front porch, you know, but having sex with your wife is still legal. Now do you still want the divorce? Yes, but only long enough to compensate a very dear friend for all the trouble she went through for both of us. Do you think that is fair? I think I will give you a 1-weekend dispensation for said friend, but otherwise we are still married. Understood? Yes, ma'am. Understood perfectly. Judge, I withdraw my petition. Can we go home, now? Bailiff, can you tell me where I lost control of this courtroom? Yes, sir, Your Honor. It was right after that pretty lady removed her coat. I do believe you're right about that, bailiff. He banged his gavel and said, I hereby declare this petition null and void. Court is adjourned. Clara and I ran to each other, and our kiss fried my testicles and raised the dead to rub against my lovely wife. Dennis looked over at the other lawyer and said, sounds like lunchtime to me. How about you, Harry? I never heard the reply because I had a second woman come from behind and hug us both. I heard that I get a weekend of special dispensation. Now when is that going to be? Clara said, in about a month, because he is not going to be in any shape to help you out for a while. I have 6 years to make up for, and I'm going to make sure that he knows I still love him. Any man that would hold his vows above friends and possible lovers has got to be compensated. It was actually 2 months later when Isabel was allowed her weekend. Believe me, she enjoyed it. Of course, so did I. To cheat or not to cheat. I found out, the hard way, that you should never make a decision until all votes are in. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Seated at my desk, I checked my watch. It was almost 4. Soon I'd head home to kick off the weekend. This one was extra special, marking 20 years since I married Katie. I couldn't wait to whisk her away for a romantic weekend at our lake house. I picked up Katie's photo, a cherished gift from years ago, reminding me of our love. By the way, I'm Thomas West, but you can call me Tom. Katie and I fell in love in high school and tied the knot shortly after graduation. She insisted on waiting until our wedding day for closeness. And she was right. It made our honeymoon unforgettable. My parents were thrilled for us, giving me $100,000 and keys to a townhouse to start. Dad explained it was just the beginning of a $5 million trust fund he set up after my birth. He rarely spoke of my biological mom, who passed when I was young, remarrying soon after. Rejected from the military due to diabetes, I pursued college with Katie. We dreamed of our futures until Jim, our son, arrived earlier than planned. Despite challenges, Katie became a teacher while I entered the business world, joining Ryder Industries. When I shared the news with Dad, he seemed proud but distant. I sensed something was amiss, but I refrained from pressing him. That's why I ultimately left the corporate world behind. For the next 16 years, life followed a typical routine. We worked, cared for our family, and enjoyed annual vacations. Due to time constraints, I quit martial arts classes about 5 years into marriage. Though Dad suggested exploring career options, I didn't dwell on it. Overall, Katie and I were content, despite the usual marital ups and downs. However, recently, I noticed changes in Katie's behavior. Initially, I attributed her mood shifts to the end of the school year and her reduced workload. She seemed withdrawn and occasionally sharp with me. I tried discussing it, but she brushed it off. Meanwhile, I was in the running for a VP position competing with Alex Marlowe. Keeping the news to myself, I didn't think it influenced her behavior. Then it hit me. Our son Jim's graduation and acceptance to West Point might be causing her anxiety about an empty nest. To lift her spirits, I planned a surprise anniversary getaway. As I pondered this, my secretary's call interrupted. It was about a meeting with Jake Henderson, the CEO, likely regarding a promotion. I rose from my desk, tidied my tie in the bathroom mirror, and headed to the elevator, ensuring my smartphone was set to record the upcoming meeting. Arriving on the 15th floor, home to the company's top brass, I made my way to Henderson's suite, where his assistant Brenda welcomed me. "Mr. Henderson is ready for you, Mr. West," she said, her grin piquing my curiosity. Henderson's voice invited me inside as I entered his office, taking a seat opposite him. Harvey, one of Henderson's guards, poured me bourbon, a gesture of familiarity with my preferences. Henderson, relaxed in demeanor, took a sip of his drink before addressing me with a smile. After exchanging pleasantries, Henderson praised my politeness and inquired about my family. I assured him all was well, mentioning our son's recent departure for West Point and our upcoming 20th anniversary celebration. "Married for 2 decades?" Jake inquired, offering congratulations. "I called you here not to mess with you. I like you. Let's discuss my upcoming promotion. It's between you and Marlowe. The board needs to gauge your flexibility, your response to stress, and your dedication to our goals. Understand, a manager's day doesn't end at 5. "I get it," I replied. "What specifics does the board seek?" "They want to witness your reactions firsthand," Jake explained. "They've reviewed your records, but they need more." "I'm not sure I follow," I admitted. Jake grinned, sipping his bourbon. "You'll get it," he assured. "How's your marriage?" "Solid, Mr. Henderson," I affirmed, sipping my drink. "Why do you ask?" "If it's as strong as you claim, cancel your weekend plans," he instructed. "Your wife should understand." He signaled Harvey, who ushered in Lenny Jameson, accompanied by Katie. She wore a revealing dress, surprising me with her appearance. The dress barely covered her backside. Though she glanced my way, she seemed unaware of me. Observing her medicated state, I noticed something white in one nostril. "Katie," I addressed her. "What's going on? Why are you dressed like that?" She remained unresponsive, her eyes glazed. Turning to Henderson, I demanded clarification. "What's happening? Why is she here like this? She's clearly medicated. What did you give her?" Henderson chuckled, admitting to medicating her with a potent concoction. He gestured for Lenny to expose her further, revealing her bosom. I attempted to rise, but found myself paralyzed, realizing Harvey had medicated me too. Henderson's sinister grin widened as Lenny undressed Katie completely. Ignoring my protests, Henderson proceeded to engage in carnal acts with her, her glazed eyes betraying her medicated state. Furious and struggling against Harvey's grip, I glared at Henderson. "I'll eliminate you," I yelled. Henderson smirked. "Is that how you speak to family?" he taunted. "And in front of your dear wife?" "She won't be my wife," I snapped. "And what do you mean by family?" Henderson revealed our shared parentage, shocking me. "That's not true," I protested. "Why?" For many reasons, he explained. Firstly, as CEO, I have executive privilege. Secondly, I've always wanted to dominate my younger brother. You didn't think I hired you for your skills, did you? He revealed his calculated manipulation, claiming it was a long-term plan to reclaim what he believed was rightfully his. Have you planned this all along? I demanded. Of course, he admitted. It's the long game. Now your fate and your wife's are in my hands. He outlined his intention to seek revenge for past grievances, shocking me with his twisted motives. You're sick, I accused. Henderson shrugged. Maybe, he conceded. It is what it is. Here's the plan, Tom, he began. No divorce. Your wife now serves me, financially and personally. She's my exclusive companion, accessible anytime, anywhere. I'm whisking her to New York for a board presentation. Relax. She'll return, albeit perhaps disheveled. You won't get away with this, I retorted. He chuckled. Done deal, he countered. You're powerless. He signaled Lenny, who struck me, apologizing. Just business, Mr. West. I awoke in a hospital bed, machines humming around me. Dad, exhausted, sat nearby. A nurse tended to me, offering ice. Dad explained I'd been unconscious 4 days since Friday night. 4 days? I echoed. It's Tuesday, Dad confirmed. You were dumped at the ER. What happened? He asked, concern etched on his face. Later, upon the doctor's arrival, I acknowledged him. Good afternoon, Mr. West. I'm Dr. Pierce, he greeted. I'm glad to see you with us again. How do you feel? It's like I was hit by a truck, I replied. Everything hurts. I have no doubt, he concurred, noting my injuries. You've been pretty banged up. Nothing broken but some bruised ribs and a small bruise. We were worried about a concussion. After his examination, he outlined the plan. We'll do x-rays and keep you overnight for observation. If all goes well, you can go home tomorrow. My dad called the police, I mentioned. They want to speak with you, he informed me. Afterward, Detective Blackstone introduced himself, eager to hear my story. I recounted what I could, then remembered my phone. Did you find my phone? I asked my father. Yes, he said, handing it over. I noticed unfamiliar text messages and decided to check them later. I found the audio recording and played it for the detective, capturing everything, including the sounds of the assault. I focused on what occurred afterward. Okay, get him out of here, Henderson ordered the guards. Take him to the hospital and say you found him there. Got it? Got it, boss, Lenny affirmed. We heard movement as they dragged me, then their conversation as they placed me in the car. Careful, Harvey cautioned. I don't want blood on the seats. He's a real pain, Lenny chuckled. Aren't they all? Harvey laughed before the recording ended. We have hospital security footage, Ryan explained. They threw you out of the car before driving off. EMTs found you and brought you inside. The car is registered to Ryder Industries. I informed HR, Dad added. Henderson already put you on sick leave for a week. Any word from Katie? I inquired. Dad shook his head. None, he replied. I've been trying to reach her, but no luck. We'll issue a bulletin, Ryan declared. Do you have a recent photo? Yes, I confirmed, retrieving my pictures. Okay, he agreed. Send this to me along with the audio recording. I'll forward the photo to the NYPD and issue a warrant for Henderson and his thugs. Do you want to press charges? Absolutely, I affirmed. Definitely. Then we'll proceed, he assured. Just relax and let the professionals handle it, he advised. Okay, detective, I acknowledged gratefully. Thank you. We'll keep in touch, Ryan promised, handing me his card. Call if you remember anything else. After he left, I turned to my father. Is what Henderson said true? I inquired. Yes and no, he replied. His father had his way with your biological mother, but she was already pregnant. After that, I filed for divorce and an alienation of affection lawsuit against Henderson. We couldn't do a DNA test back then, but we all have the same blood type. Dad said he wouldn't bore me with all the details, but things at home worsened. My biological mother turned to drinks and medicates, eventually dying from an overdose 6 months after I was born. Damn, I reacted. The lawsuit against Henderson and Ryder was ongoing, Dad revealed. But we settled out of court, using the money to set up your trust fund. I couldn't disclose any details due to the agreement. About a year later, I met Patricia, Dad continued. She loved you from the start, insisting on adopting you after we got married. Unable to have children, she considered you her own. So how did you know I was really your son? I asked. Remember the motorcycle accident when you were 16? He queried. Yeah, I recalled. Well, he elaborated, after I was injured, I requested a DNA test at the hospital to confirm our relationship. And? I pressed. The results showed over a 99% likelihood that I'm your father, he explained. It means your biological mother was pregnant with you before Henderson's involvement. For me, you're my dad no matter what, I assured him, bringing a smile to his face. What happened to Henderson? I inquired. Dad informed me he died from a stroke around the time I entered college. His son stepped up as the new general director. I had hoped the younger Henderson had learned from his father's mistakes, but I was mistaken, Dad explained. That's why you weren't thrilled about me joining there, right? I questioned. He nodded. Yes, he affirmed. I wished to tell you, but couldn't. I pray I have it now. It's not on you, Dad, I reassured. I can't fathom how Katie could fall for his nonsense after all this time. It's baffling, I remarked. She may have been medicated, but something feels off, I pondered. Why was she there and in that attire? Just then, a knock sounded at the door. Yes, I called out. Brenda, our assistant, peeked in. May I come in? She asked timidly. Certainly, Brenda, I welcomed her. What's up? She entered, holding a vase of flowers and a large card. We all pitched in and got this for you, she explained, placing the flowers on the nightstand. She handed me the card. I'm really sorry about all of this, Brenda expressed. Did you know what Henderson planned? I inquired. I knew he had something with your wife, she admitted. But not this, she added, pointing to me. What went down? I probed. That morning he gave me a company card, told me to fetch your wife, said she was expecting me. He instructed me to take her out, get her a revealing dress, and then to a salon, Brenda disclosed. He also insisted that she get a bikini wax. Aria completed a Brazilian wax, Brenda recounted. I had a pretty good idea of what he meant. This isn't the first time he's pulled something like this. So your boss is using you to groom his girls? Dad questioned. Brenda's face flushed red, and she wisely averted her gaze. Did you know he medicated her? Dad pressed. He medicates all the women he sleeps with, Mr. West, she admitted. He loves to experiment. Has he ever medicated you? Dad inquired. She nodded. One time, she disclosed. He gave me just a small amount, she continued. Said it was only a quarter of the normal dose. Kept me going for about an hour. Do you know how much he gave my wife? I interjected. She shook her head. No, I don't, she admitted. He mentioned giving Katie 3 times the usual amount, I informed her. Her eyes widened, and she covered her face with her hands. Oh my God, she exclaimed. I had no clue. Your poor wife must have been out of her mind for hours. I bet she didn't even realize you were there. This stuff really messes you up. When I walked into your office, you knew what was going to happen, didn't you? I probed. She nodded solemnly. I knew, she confirmed. But I didn't expect him to be so cruel to you, honestly. Do you know where Henderson and my wife are now? I asked. Last I heard, they're still in New York, she replied. Would you be willing to talk to the police, Dad? I asked. I'll do whatever I can to help, she promised. She glanced back at me with tears in her eyes. I'm truly sorry about this, Mr. West. Just one more thing, Brenda, I added. What's going on? She inquired. Did my wife have any idea what was going to happen? I questioned. She nodded. I'm pretty sure she had an idea, Mr. West, she replied. I know Mr. Henderson has been in touch with her quite often in the past month or so, inviting her out to dinner multiple times. They've had long lunches. I'm not sure if anything happened between them or not. He never disclosed it to me. But do you think they were involved? I pressed. It's highly probable, but I can't say for certain. I'm not privy to all the details, she admitted. You seem to assist Henderson with things like this frequently, correct? Dad inquired. Quite frequently, she admitted quietly. So you condone his behavior? He probed. She shook her head. You misunderstand, she clarified. I'm a single mother with a child who has special needs, and Mr. Henderson compensates me generously for my assistance and my discretion. Well, your silence is what led to my son ending up in the hospital this time, young lady, he retorted, his patience waning. She took a step back as he glared at her. Mr. West, I truly didn't know they intended injury to your son. I would have warned him if I had known, she defended herself. Dad reclined in his chair, silently observing her. Brenda, the police detective will be reaching out to you regarding this matter, I informed her. I advise you to be available and fully cooperate. Understand? She nodded. I understand, Mr. West, she affirmed. All right, I said, and please convey my gratitude to everyone for the flowers and card. I will, she promised, dabbing at a tear in her eye. Once again, I'm sorry." With that, she turned and exited the room. After the door closed, I turned to my father. "That sheds some light on things," I remarked. "Katie has been acting a bit off since school ended. Initially, I thought it was because Jim had gone to West Point." "We'll uncover the truth," he assured. Another knock sounded, and a hospital attendant wheeled in a food cart. Dad grinned and rose. "Dinner time," he announced. "Better head home before Mom sends out a search party," he joked. "Take care, son. Rest up. See you in the morning." "Thanks, Dad," I replied. "Say hi to Mom for me and tell her I love her." "Will do, son," he affirmed. "And hey, love you too." We fist bumped and he exited. The attendant smirked at Dad's departure, then served my meal. It smelled decent, and hunger gnawed at me after days without eating. I devoured the meatloaf and potatoes, relishing the mushroom sauce. Though not up to Mom's or Katie's caliber, it sufficed. Even the broccoli, which I usually avoid, tasted all right. After finishing dessert, I sipped coffee and checked my texts. 4 messages awaited, each with a video. The first, from Friday, read, "Enjoy. Bet you wish you weren't here." Unfamiliar, I hesitantly opened it. Katie stood before grinning men, her dress akin to the one Henderson forced her to wear. Recognizing the board members, I braced for the worst. They stripped her and she complied. Anguish brewed. It'd bolster the lawsuit. Summoning courage for the next message from Saturday morning, regret filled me as Katie frolicked with men. The third, late Saturday, depicted her with multiple partners. The fourth, from early Sunday, diverged. Katie and Henderson stared into the camera. Her bloodshot eyes and dark circles revealed torment. Henderson sneered. "This is your wife's new life," he taunted. Turning to Katie, he commanded, "Tell him who I am, honey." "Jake Henderson is my master," she stated, her voice devoid of any emotion. "That's correct," he confirmed. "And what's your new role?" Henderson inquired. "I am my master's undressed love-making toy," she declared. "I engage in carnal activities with whomever he commands, whenever he commands, and however he commands, as frequently as he commands." "Very well," Jake acknowledged. "And convey to that idiot that he won't ever touch you again, you betrayed man," Katie asserted, pointing a finger at the camera. "You'll never lay a hand on me again." Henderson chuckled at her remark before addressing the camera. "And remember, don't cause trouble, or the next time I have Harvey and Lenny talk to you, you might not wake up. See you later, loser. Goodbye." The video concluded. A surge of emotions washed over me. Hatred, anger, sadness, disappointment. I couldn't believe what I had just witnessed and heard. It seemed evident that he had manipulated her. I glanced at the wedding ring on my finger. It held no significance anymore, so I removed it and tossed it onto the nightstand. Perhaps I could sell it for a few bucks at a pawn shop. At that instant, I was resolved to divorce Katie. I didn't care if Jake approved or not. Furthermore, I was determined to make him suffer. But how? Alienation of affection. Lawsuits were a possibility when my father divorced, but not anymore. I entertained thoughts of damaging that despicable fool, but in all honesty, he wasn't worth jeopardizing my freedom for. I contacted Ryan and briefed him on the videos and Henderson's threats. He requested that I forward them to him and assured me he'd be in touch. Following his instructions, I powered off my phone. I contemplated reaching out to Kathy, but concluded it would be futile. I placed my phone on the nightstand and turned on the TV, hoping to distract myself from what I had just witnessed. Eventually, I drifted off to sleep and found myself dreaming of happier times when I had a loving and faithful wife. The next morning, I awoke to the sounds of nurses bustling about my room, checking my vital signs and monitoring the equipment. 2 of them escorted me to the radiology department for additional x-rays before returning me to my room. Once back, an orderly brought me breakfast. Shortly after I finished my bacon and egg breakfast, Dr. Pierce entered my room with good news. "Everything went smoothly, and you're clear to go home," he informed me. He prescribed medication for the pain and provided a set of instructions. "Discharge paperwork will take about an hour, so why not give your parents a call to come pick you up?" he suggested. "By the time they arrive, you should be ready to go. Take care of yourself and make sure to schedule a follow-up appointment with your regular doctor within a week." "Thank you, Doc," I replied. "I'll do that." After he left, I contacted my parents and shared the positive news. About an hour later, they arrived at my room. Mom enveloped me in a hug, tears shimmering in her eyes. "Oh, Tom, I'm so sorry you had to go through this," she expressed. "How are you feeling?" "Could be better, Mom," I admitted. "Well, I whipped up some of my lasagna for you and kept it warm in the oven," she informed me. I always adored my mother's lasagna. It was rich with layers of cheese, mushrooms, and meat filling, a taste sensation unlike any other. I looked at her with gratitude. "Thank you, Mom," I said sincerely. "Your lasagna never fails to brighten my day." "I'm glad, son," she replied. "Your father filled me in on what happened, and I'm furious. I have half a mind to give that woman a piece of my mind." Dad and I exchanged a knowing glance and chuckled. There was no doubt in my mind that if she were here, Mom would have taken Katie to task. "Any updates?" Dad inquired. I briefed him on the videos and Henderson's threat. "Videos?" Mom questioned. "Trust me, Mom, you don't want to see them," I cautioned. "They're beyond awful." "I guess you'll need the name of a good divorce attorney," Dad remarked. "Yeah," I agreed. "There's no way to overlook what she did or is probably still doing. Plus, I need to break it to Jim. It's going to devastate him." "All right, I'll make some calls," Dad promised. Just then, a nurse entered with my discharge papers and instructions. Insisting I use a wheelchair, she wheeled me out while Mom and Dad walked alongside. At the loading dock, I slid into the back seat. Dad drove us home, stopping at a pharmacy so I could pick up my pain medication. I noticed my car parked in the driveway when we arrived. "Your mom and I retrieved your car from Ryder on Saturday," Dad informed me. "Katie's car is still in the garage." We entered the house, and its emptiness without Katie became painfully apparent. The aroma of lasagna wafting from the oven lifted my spirits a tad. "I hope you don't mind, but I tidied up a bit yesterday afternoon," Mom mentioned. "It was getting a bit stuffy." "Not at all, Mom," I assured her. "Thanks for everything." Just then, we spotted a dark sedan parked outside. I recognized Ryan stepping out of the driver's side, accompanied by another man in a suit. I welcomed them in. "Detective Blackstone," I greeted. "Please, come in." I held the door as they entered. Ryan shook my hand, and I introduced him to Mom. "Can we offer you gentlemen something to drink?" Mom offered. "Coffee? Soda?" Ryan declined. "No, ma'am, but thank you," he replied, then turned to the other man. "Mr. West, this is Detective Hawthorne from the NYPD Homicide Department." I was taken aback momentarily, but extended my hand to Hawthorne. "Please, have a seat," I invited, and we settled in. "Homicide?" I echoed. Hawthorne nodded, presenting a photograph. Katie's face was recognizable, but she appeared lifeless, her complexion unsettling. "Can you confirm the identity of the woman in this photo?" Hawthorne inquired. "That looks like my wife, Kathy," I confirmed. "But she was alive early Sunday morning. I have a video." "Did she have any distinguishing marks or tattoos?" Hawthorne probed. "Yes, a small dolphin tattoo on her upper right thigh," I recalled. "She got it on a dare 15 years ago." Hawthorne glanced at Ryan and then back at me, his expression somber. "I regret to inform you, Mr. West, but it appears that your wife may have been homicide," he stated. "Homicide?" I exclaimed. "How? When?" "That's what we're investigating, Mr. West," Hawthorne replied. "The coroner is still examining her, but the initial assessment suggests she died from a massive heart attack." "But wouldn't that rule out slaying?" I questioned. "Well, her body was discovered in a shallow grave in Central Park yesterday afternoon," Hawthorne disclosed. "In my experience, such findings typically indicate foul play. We're awaiting toxicology results, which may provide more insight." "What more can you tell us?" I recounted the entire ordeal to them. Ryan took notes while listening attentively, though he had heard the details before. Retrieving my phone, I played the audio recording and then the video for them. Mom, overwhelmed, burst into tears, and Dad ushered her out of the room, leaving me alone with the detectives. After they finished viewing the footage, I shared Brenda's account. They made notes and exchanged glances before addressing me. "This clarifies the bruises and condition of Mrs. West's body," Hawthorne remarked. Turning to me, he continued, "This woman, Harris, is she on duty today?" "To my knowledge, yes," I replied. "We'll need to speak with her," Hawthorne directed at Ryan, who nodded in agreement. He then turned to me again. "What do you know about the Medicades Henderson mentioned?" "The super ecstasy?" he inquired. "Not much beyond what Brenda told me and what I experienced," I admitted. "The doctor mentioned that the substance they used on me had already left my system." "And Henderson and his associates? Any insights there?" Ryan pressed. "Henderson's private jet departed from New York last night. According to the pilot's filed flight plan, they were returning here, but there's no record of the plane landing," I explained. "Ryder has branches nationwide. He could be anywhere." "Excellent," Hawthorne remarked, turning to Ryan. "We'll need to involve the FAA and possibly the FBI. I have a contact at the local FAA office," Ryan offered. "We can head there after executing a search warrant on Ryder." Hawthorne nodded in agreement. What's the next step? I inquired. If your accounts are accurate, this could escalate into a federal case since Henderson transported your wife across state lines, Ryan stated. We're considering multiple charges against him, including slaying and potentially kidnapping. In the meantime, Hawthorne added, my team will continue their investigation and recover your wife's body. This process may take several days. We'll also detain the individuals seen in the video for questioning. I nodded in acknowledgement. Ryan glanced at Hawthorne before addressing me. I'd like to speak with Mr. West privately, if you don't mind, he requested. Hawthorne nodded at me. Of course, I'll step out to make a few calls. I'll be just outside, he said before exiting the room. He glanced at me before proceeding. I sincerely apologize for all of this, Mr. West, he conveyed. Thank you, Detective, I responded, shaking his hand. After he departed, Ryan redirected his attention to me. Mr. West, Tom, he began. I wanted to have a private conversation with you regarding what transpired with your wife. I appreciate that, Ryan, I acknowledged. I'll spare you the graphic details, Ryan began. But based on what I've gathered, your wife's final 48 hours were utterly harrowing. I consulted with a medical examiner back east, and he corroborated my suspicions. I don't believe your wife consented to what was done to her. I suspect she was subjected to a brutal assault. She was sufferized and exploited by a group of power-hungry individuals. Look, Ryan, I understand your intentions, and I'm grateful, I responded. I truly do. But the reality is Katie and Henderson were involved for about a month before this incident. I'm not entirely sure what transpired between them, but I have a fairly good idea. Katie could have put an end to all of this prior to last Friday, but she chose not to. I don't understand her actions, and now I never will. I understand, Ryan murmured. He retrieved a business card from his pocket and handed it to me. I suggest you consult with Dr. Harmon. She's highly reputable. Give her a call. All right, I'll do that. Thank you, I acknowledged. I'm concerned that Henderson's associates might return for you, he expressed. I would assign officers to protect you, but unfortunately, our resources are limited. However, I'll instruct the dispatcher to increase patrols in your area. Do you own a firearm? No, I replied. He nodded. All right, he stated. In that case, always keep your doors and windows secured. If you suspect anything, dial emergency immediately. I'll remember that, Ryan, I assured him. Just then, Hawthorne re-entered the house. I just spoke with your partner, Johnson, he informed. He's wanted nationwide, and we have search warrants ready to execute. Ryan nodded and stood up. We'll keep in touch, Tom, he said, shaking my hand. Hawthorne extended his hand. I offer my condolences for your loss, Mr. West, he conveyed. Thank you, Detective, I replied. After they departed, my parents returned and took a seat. Are you going to be all right, son? Dad inquired. I think so, Dad, I replied. I have a couple more calls to make, and I'm not particularly looking forward to them. In many ways, that's true. I needed to inform Jim about his mother's situation, and I also had to reach out to Katie's parents. Understood? Dad asked. Understood. If you need anything, just give us a call, all right? Dad reiterated. I'll do that, Dad. Thanks, I affirmed. We exchanged embraces, and I watched them depart. I dialed Jim's cell phone and left a message, anticipating it might take some time for him to return my call. The next call on my agenda was one I dreaded. Kathy's father, retired Marine Colonel Bill Anderson, earned the moniker Bloody Bill for his heroic exploits in Afghanistan, allegedly dispatching multiple Taliban fighters with just a knife. His uniform boasted more ribbons and medals than I'd ever seen. He and Katie's mother, Alice, settled in the country after his military service. I hesitated to break the news of Katie's pass away to the colonel, but we had a good rapport, and he insisted I call him Dad. Summoning courage, I called him. Anderson's residence, he answered. It's me, Tom, I said. Are you okay? He asked, sensing my distress. Not really, Dad, I replied. Katie's dead. Shocked, he demanded details. After a brief explanation, he decided they'd visit at 4 p.m., adding a quip about civilian time. Got it, Dad, I chuckled. And I'll have coffee ready. With that, we hung up, and I sank into my chair, overwhelmed by grief. My world had crumbled, my marriage had faltered, and now Katie, the love of my life, was gone. Despite my disdain for her actions, I couldn't bear the thought of her pass away, unlike Henderson, who I viewed differently. I rose and indulged in my mom's comforting lasagna, a remedy that had always eased my troubles. Cleaning up afterward, I roamed the house, each corner triggering memories of Katie and our life together. Realizing I couldn't remain in this house, I resolved to sell it once everything settled, opting for something smaller. Discovering Katie's phone on the nightstand, I unlocked it with her familiar 4-digit code. Annoyingly, it happened at that moment. Examining her call log, I noticed repeated calls from Henderson and Brenda's workplace, particularly on Friday morning. Scanning her messages, I found an exchange with Henderson from a few months back, lacking significant context. Perusing her emails, I found nothing incriminating. Turning off the phone, I placed it back on the nightstand. Checking the time, I realized it was already 3:45 p.m. I had no clue how much time I had spent on Katie's phone. Knowing the Colonel's punctuality, I headed to the kitchen and brewed fresh coffee, strong, just the way he preferred it. As the digital clock on the coffee pot struck 4 p.m., the doorbell chimed. I knew it was the Colonel, so I welcomed him and Alice inside. "Damn it, son, didn't anyone ever teach you to duck?" the Colonel exclaimed upon seeing my face. "My father tried, but I don't think I ever fully grasped it," I half-joked. "Come in." As they entered, another car pulled into the driveway. I observed a tall, lanky man stepping out and approaching the door. "I hope you don't mind," Bill mentioned. "After what you told me, I took the liberty of calling for reinforcements." By then, the tall man had entered the house carrying a laptop bag and 2 more bags, leaving me wondering what was happening. Bill introduced him. "Ron, this is my brother-in-law, Tom West," he said. "Tom, meet Ron Wiseman. We served together in the Corps." "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Wiseman," I greeted, shaking his hand. "Please call me Ron," he insisted. I glanced at the Colonel. "Ron and his wife have experience dealing with individuals like Henderson," the Colonel explained. "Plus, he possesses certain skills that could prove valuable." "What kind of skills?" I inquired. "I'm an accountant by profession," Ron disclosed. "An accountant?" I echoed. Ron grinned as he set his bags down. "Well, I'm a bit more than just that," he elaborated. "I'm involved with a special task force and have access to information that, as the Colonel mentioned, could be quite useful." "I see," I responded. "Well, please have a seat and I'll fetch us some coffee." Alice joined me in the kitchen and we returned with 4 large cups of coffee. Hot, fresh, black, and strong. Just how the Colonel preferred it. Alice handed him his cup, and after a cautious sip, he remarked, "Not bad, Tom." "Thank you. Now why don't you bring us all up to speed?" I recounted the events up until Ryan and Hawthorne left the house earlier. "You mentioned video recordings?" the Colonel inquired. "Yes," I confirmed. "They're quite disturbing." "I'd still like to see them," he insisted. "Don't worry, after 30 years in the Corps, there's not much that Alice and I haven't seen." I retrieved my phone and played the videos for them. They watched all 4 before I returned the phone. Bill and Alice seemed visibly upset, but Ron remained composed, pausing this video at times to scrutinize the individuals involved. "It's evident she was medicated," Alice remarked. Bill and Ron nodded in agreement. "But with what exactly? I'm not certain," I admitted. "Brenda Henderson's assistant mentioned something about super ecstasy or the like." "And Henderson medicated you too?" Ron inquired. "Yes," I confirmed. "But by the time I was treated at the hospital, it had already left my system." By then, Ron had set up his laptop and connected to the internet. "Those 2 thugs who attacked you?" he continued. "Did you catch them on video?" Ron inquired. "Yes," I replied. I opened one of the videos and paused it so Ron could examine it closely. "Those 2 big guys over there are Harvey Strauss and Lenny Jameson," I pointed out, indicating them in the footage. "Can you send me these videos?" Ron requested, providing his email address. "Certainly," I agreed. "I'll forward the videos to you." Ron confirmed receipt of the files and began analyzing them. "You know those aren't their real names," Ron remarked. "No, I wasn't aware," I admitted. "What are their real identities?" "They're former criminals," Ron disclosed. "They disappeared after their boss, James Brolin, also known as Jimmy the Weasel, was discovered homicide in his own bed. The authorities have been searching for them for quite some time." "How long have they been working for Henderson?" "I believe it's been a couple of years now," I replied. "Why do you ask?" "They've vanished around this time," Ron noted. "Are you suggesting they've made Henderson a wanted man across the nation?" "Exactly," I confirmed. "All right," Ron said, clicking his mouse. "Let's see what we can dig up. I'll let this program run for a while." As Ron's program processed, we continued our conversation. "So, here's the plan," the Colonel interjected. After discussing further, Ron agreed to remain with me until these individuals were neutralized. "I'm not comfortable with you being alone here while they're still out there," he expressed. "Ron, keep me posted as soon as you get any updates on them. All right, I'll take it from there." "Understood, Colonel," Ron replied. "And what about you?" I inquired of Bill. "It's better if you're kept in the dark, son," he replied. "Let's just say Marines handle our own business, and leave it at that. Don't worry. Henderson and his associates will face consequences one way or another. You mentioned you're off until Monday due to illness? Yes, I confirmed. What's your plan after this? He probed. I can't remain at Ryder after all this, I stated. I've decided to resign, giving 2 weeks' notice starting Monday. Additionally, I'm considering selling this house and downsizing. I can't blame you, he sympathized. Any update on when Katie's body will be released? It could be several days, according to what Hawthorne told me, I relayed. If you need assistance with final arrangements, don't hesitate to ask, he offered. Thank you, Dad. I appreciate it, I expressed. Bill rose, signaling the end of the meeting. Alice and Ron followed suit. We should head out, dear, Bill addressed Alice. Ron, keep me informed of any developments. Will do, Ron assured. Bill turned to me and embraced me, a gesture that took me by surprise. In all my years knowing him, I've never seen him hug another man. Everything will work out, son, he reassured me. Alice stepped forward after he released me and embraced me gently. I'm truly sorry for what happened, Tom, she comforted. Don't worry about a thing, all right? I won't, Mom, I assured her. Thank you for coming. You're welcome, she responded. And don't hesitate to reach out if you need anything. Shortly after their departure, my phone rang. Seeing it was Jim, I answered and sat down beside him to recount the events. At first, he was taken aback by this news. Dad, that just doesn't sound like something she could do, Jim remarked. I know. It doesn't make any sense to me either, I concurred. Are there any clues as to why she did this? He inquired. No, son, I checked her phone and email, but there's nothing there, I explained. Maybe she has a burner phone somewhere, he suggested. A burner phone? I questioned. Yeah, one of those disposable gadgets you toss away after using pay-as-you-go minutes, Jim clarified. Perhaps she has one hidden that you haven't found yet. My mind immediately shifted to the videos they sent me. They originated from a number I didn't recognize. Maybe it was her burner phone. If so, then no one could trace where she is now. You might be onto something, I acknowledged. I hadn't considered that. We conversed a bit more, and Jim concluded by asking me to inform him when his mother's body would be released for burial. After the call, I mentioned the burner phone theory to Ron. That makes sense, he agreed. If you have the number, I'll see what I can uncover. I provided him with the number, and he initiated another program to trace it. A few minutes later, he had his answer. This number corresponds to a phone purchased here in the city, he reported. As you suspected, it's a burner phone. The number is registered to Ryder and was last detected Tuesday morning in NYC. There hasn't been any activity on it since you received the last video. Any idea where he might be now? I inquired. None, he replied. As far as we know, it was disassembled and disposed of in the river. He returned to his computer, prompting me to prepare a guest room upstairs since I didn't know how long he'd stay. He remained until Saturday, spending much time on the computer. While unaware of his activities, we've grown closer since his arrival on Wednesday. He disclosed being a Marine sniper now working for a federal private task force. Despite his background as a CPA, most of his work involved research. He shared tidbits about his and his wife Amy's interactions with executives, which intrigued me. The previous night, he requested if Amy could join for the weekend, to which I agreed. She arrived Saturday morning, and after introductions, they retreated to the guest room. Giving them space, I occupied myself in the garage for about an hour before returning inside. Ron and Amy were engrossed in something on his computer when I joined. Any updates? I inquired. Yes, affirmed Ron. Firstly, the FBI has taken over the investigation. Secondly, about half an hour ago, I received a solid hit on our targets. All three? I queried. Yeah, they're near Colorado Springs, Ron confirmed. I've already notified the colonel. Then he'll handle it himself. There's something else. What is it? I inquired. I was able to access the official autopsy report on your wife, he disclosed. What does it say? I pressed. According to the report, your wife did indeed suffer a massive heart attack from the chemicals Henderson administered. But that's not what ended her life, Ron revealed. They discovered soil particles in her lungs. What does that mean? I asked. It means she was still alive when they buried her, Ron stated. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Barely alive, but alive nonetheless. I'm sorry, there's more. More? I exclaimed in disbelief. There was also extensive bruising around her private parts, and a toxicology report revealed significant levels of various chemicals in her bloodstream, including ecstasy and cocaine. I'm sorry, Tom, but it appears the last hours of her life were brutal. I can't believe she willingly participated in all of this. What do you think happened? I questioned. From what I've gathered, Henderson and his cohorts likely had quite a wild party, he speculated. Your wife was so under the influence of what Henderson gave her that she lost control. At some point, she suffered a heart attack. Instead of seeking medical help, they likely presumed she was deceased, so they disposed of her by burying her. I sank into a chair, stunned by Ron's revelations. Amy approached and embraced me as tears streamed down my face. Henderson and his accomplices are wanted for slaying, conspiracy to commit slaying, the production and distribution of various controlled substances, and racketeering, among other charges, Ron disclosed. The other individuals in your videos have already been apprehended and charged, but Henderson is the primary target. What do you think his fate will be? I inquired. Ron shrugged. Who can say? He replied. One can only speculate about the workings of the courts these days. The next morning, I was awakened by my phone ringing. Glancing at my watch, I saw it was 4:30 a.m. I wondered who could be calling at such an hour. Answering, I heard a masked voice. Check your text messages, it instructed before hanging up. Opening the message, I found a video attached. In it, 3 undressed bound men were dumped in front of a brick building. Recognizing them as Henderson, Lenny, and Harvey, I watched as a sign was hung around Henderson's neck, confessing to Katie West's slaying. I pondered if the FBI would get involved. Finishing the video, I returned to sleep. 4 hours later, I descended to find Amy cooking breakfast in the kitchen. I hope you don't mind me trying my hand in your kitchen, she said. Ron gets cranky without his morning bacon. Not at all, I replied. I get a little cranky myself without bacon. Help yourself. After she finished, we all sat down to eat. As we finished, there was a knock at the door. Opening it, I found Ryan standing there. May I come in? He asked. Of course, I replied, ushering him in. Introducing him to Ron and Amy as friends of my father-in-law, I offered him coffee. No, I won't stay long, he declined. I just wanted to inform you that Henderson and 2 of his top accomplices were apprehended in Colorado Springs early this morning. That's good news, right? I inquired. Yes, he confirmed. They're talking. There are some questions about the circumstances of their capture, but I assume you're not privy to that. No, I'm not, I asserted. I've been here all night. Ron and Amy can vouch for that. Uh-huh, he responded. Well, I just wanted to keep you informed. Now I'll leave you to it. Take care of yourself. Thanks, Ryan, I expressed as he departed. Turning to Ron, I posed a question. You don't happen to know anything about this, do you? Don't ask, and I won't fib, he replied with a knowing grin. I still suggest giving your father-in-law a call to express gratitude. Nodding in agreement, I retrieved my phone. Anderson, Bill greeted upon answering. Dad, just wanted to inform you that the police paid me a visit, I relayed. Henderson and his cohort were apprehended in Colorado Springs. Well, that's a relief, he responded. Ron advised me to extend my thanks, I added. Did he indeed? Bill inquired. Yes, I confirmed. So I wanted to express my appreciation. You're welcome, son, he replied warmly. I heard you received a call last night. That's correct, I affirmed. That sign was quite the touch. Do you think it gave them a lead? His grin indicated agreement. I sure hope so, he said. We'll catch up soon, son. Take care of yourself. I will, Dad, I assured. Thank you. The next Monday, I resigned from work, receiving understanding but regretful farewells. Then, I visited a realtor to initiate the process of selling our longtime home, bracing myself for the emotional and logistical challenges. A week later, Katie's body was released by the New York medical examiner as her parents arranged her funeral. Despite conflicting emotions, I attended mainly to support Bill and Alice, who had been kind to me during this ordeal. Jim managed to take a break from West Point to join me at the funeral, where we shared memories and mourned together. I chose not to divulge Katie's actions to him, wanting to preserve his fond memories of her. Following the funeral, I consulted with a lawyer about potentially suing Ryder, as there seemed to be a strong case against Henderson and the board of directors given their legal troubles. The trial against Henderson and the involved board members felt endless. The U.S. attorney pursued the pass-away penalty for Henderson, while the defense filed numerous motions. I testified about my own experience and listened to others' testimonies. Brenda also testified, revealing that Katie wasn't the only sufferer of Henderson's medicating and exploitation. When questioned, Brenda admitted uncertainty about whether Katie and Henderson had an affair before the incident. Video evidence suggested Katie initially rejected Henderson's advances, but later seemed to consider them. Searches of Henderson's office and home uncovered evidence of Medicaid experimentation. Expert witnesses confirmed that many of the compounds he created were likely intended as date abduction medicates. During the trial, I finally got the full story of what happened to Katie. It turned out that Henderson had kept her alive over the weekend with medicates and drinks. At some point during their festivities, she experienced severe chest pain and collapsed unconscious. The men claimed they checked her but couldn't find a pulse. Instead of seeking immediate medical help, which was nearby, they assumed she was dead. After cleaning her up a bit, they placed her in a car trunk and buried her in Central Park. Under questioning by the U.S. attorney, none of them admitted to having CPR training or medical qualifications. Their fate was sealed when a medical examiner found soil in her lungs matching that of the burial site, indicating she was buried alive. Some jury members visibly reacted to this revelation. At the trial's conclusion, Jake, his 2 accomplices, and everyone involved in the weekend were found guilty on all charges. The judge opted against the pass-away penalty, sentencing Jake to life in prison, along with Lenny and Harvey. Others received slightly lighter prison terms. Civil lawsuits against Ryder and Henderson followed the criminal trial. The company lost most of its customers and went into receivership. Henderson, after paying a substantial sum, filed for bankruptcy. The fallout from Henderson's scheme to betray me was far-reaching. Katie was dead, and he and his cohorts were bankrupt and imprisoned. The company vanished, leaving hundreds unemployed. As for me, life moved forward. I sold the house and bought a 2-bedroom apartment. Closing the door on the house for the last time was bittersweet. However, I had my whole life ahead of me. My advisor suggested taking some time off, maybe a cruise to meet someone new. So I booked a round-the-world cruise and headed to the airport, excited for the adventures that lay ahead.
From street to success, a 12-year journey. John, a middle-aged carpenter with a kind heart, walks through the bustling city streets, reflecting on a day 12 years ago that changed his life. On a cold, rainy evening, he noticed a 10-year-old girl, Emily, huddled in a doorway, begging for food. Moved by her plight, John offered her a meal and shelter. This simple act of kindness blossomed into a deep bond, providing Emily with the stability and support she needed. Years later, Emily, now a successful software engineer, honors John at a high-profile tech event, revealing how his belief in her transformed her life. Hello, my friends. I hope all you are fine. This is Narrative Stories channel. Let's start this story. John, a middle-aged man with a warm demeanor, navigated through the bustling city streets. The sun had just begun to set, casting a golden hue over the skyscrapers and bathing the city in a soft amber glow. As he walked, John's thoughts drifted back to a day 12 years ago that had changed his life in ways he couldn't have imagined. The sounds of traffic and the chatter of people around him faded as his mind wandered back to that cold, rainy evening. John had always been a man of simple means, working diligently as a carpenter. He had a kind heart and a steady hand, qualities that endeared him to his clients and friends. Yet there was a restlessness within him, a sense that he hadn't quite fulfilled his purpose. This feeling often led him to reflect on his past, especially on that particular night that seemed so distant yet vividly present in his memory. 12 years ago, on a cold and rainy evening, John had been walking home from work, the city's streets almost deserted under the relentless downpour. His coat was soaked through, and his breath came out in visible puffs in the chilly air. As he hurried along, eager to reach the warmth of his modest apartment, he noticed a small figure huddled in the doorway of a closed store. The girl was young, around 10 years old, with matted hair and clothes that clung to her small frame, drenched and dirty. She was holding a cardboard sign with shaky handwriting that read, "Please help. Need money for food." John's heart ached at the sight. He slowed his pace, his eyes meeting hers. They were wide and filled with a mixture of fear and hope, a look that tugged deeply at his conscience. John approached the girl cautiously, not wanting to startle her. "Hey there," he said gently, kneeling to her level. "My name's John. What's yours?" She hesitated, glancing around as if expecting someone to swoop in and take away her chance of getting help. "Emily," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. John smiled warmly. "Emily, are you hungry?" She nodded, her eyes wide and cautious. "Come with me," he offered, extending his hand. "Let's get you something to eat." They walked together to a nearby diner, John holding an umbrella over Emily as she shivered beside him. Inside, the warmth enveloped them, and John ordered a hearty meal for Emily. She ate ravenously, and as she did, John gently coaxed her story from her. Emily had been living on the streets for several weeks after her mother, a single parent struggling with addiction, had disappeared. Emily had no other family to turn to and had been trying to survive on her own. As Emily finished her meal, John faced a decision. He couldn't bear the thought of sending her back out into the cold night. "Emily," he said softly, "I have a spare room at my place. It's not much, but it's warm and safe. Would you like to stay there for a while?" Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she nodded. "Yes, please," she whispered, her voice cracking with relief and gratitude. John led her to his modest apartment, a small but cozy space filled with handmade furniture and the smell of fresh wood. He showed her to the spare room, which he quickly prepared with clean sheets and blankets. Emily looked around, her eyes wide with wonder and gratitude. For the first time in weeks, she felt safe. Over the next few days, John and Emily began to form a bond. They shared meals and conversations, and John learned more about Emily's past. She was a bright and curious child, despite the hardships she had faced. She talked about her dreams, her love for books, and her longing for a normal life. John listened, offering comfort and understanding. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, Emily asked, "Why did you help me, John?" He looked at her, his eyes filled with kindness. "Because everyone deserves a chance, Emily, and sometimes all it takes is one person to believe in you." Emily smiled, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. John knew that providing temporary shelter was only the first step. He wanted to give Emily the stability she needed to thrive. He began by enrolling her in a local school. The principal, moved by Emily's story, agreed to help her catch up on her studies. Emily was nervous on her first day, but John reassured her, walking her to the school gates and promising to be there when she finished. Every day after school, John would help Emily with her homework, encouraging her to pursue her interests. He noticed her fascination with technology and decided to nurture it. He introduced her to computers and basic coding, something he had a rudimentary understanding of. Emily's eyes would light up as she learned, her mind soaking up knowledge like a sponge. Despite the new opportunities, Emily faced numerous challenges. She struggled with her past trauma and the emotional scars left by her mother's abandonment. At school, she sometimes felt out of place, her experiences making her feel different from her peers. John was always there to support her, providing a safe space where she could express her feelings and fears. Emily's resilience began to shine through. She tackled her studies with determination, often staying up late to finish her assignments and learn new coding skills. John marveled at her progress, proud of the young woman she was becoming. He made sure to celebrate her achievements, no matter how small, reinforcing her confidence and self-worth. As the years passed, Emily continued to excel in school. She discovered a passion for technology, particularly in coding and software development. John's modest apartment became a hub of learning and creativity, filled with books, computers, and coding projects. Emily's grades soared, and she began to dream of a future in the tech industry. In high school, Emily's talent was recognized by her teachers, who encouraged her to apply for scholarships. John supported her every step of the way, helping her with applications and essays. The turning point came when Emily was awarded a full scholarship to a prestigious university, a testament to her hard work and determination. The day she received the acceptance letter, she ran to John, tears of joy streaming down her face. "We did it, John," she exclaimed, and he hugged her tightly, his heart swelling with pride. Emily's university years were marked by hard work and remarkable achievements. She thrived in her studies, earning top marks and gaining the respect of her professors and peers. She continued to stay in touch with John, frequently visiting him and sharing her successes. John's pride in Emily grew with each passing year, his heart warmed by the knowledge that his act of kindness had set her on a path to success. Upon graduating with honors, Emily was offered a position at a leading tech company. She dove into her work with passion, quickly climbing the ranks and earning recognition for her innovative ideas. Yet, she never forgot the man who had given her a chance when she needed it most. John's influence remained a guiding force in her life, his lessons in kindness and resilience shaping her approach to her career and relationships. 12 years after that fateful night, Emily had not only become a successful software engineer, but also an entrepreneur. She developed a groundbreaking app designed to help children from disadvantaged backgrounds learn coding and technology skills. The app gained widespread recognition, receiving accolades from the tech community and educational institutions alike. Emily decided to launch her app with a special event, inviting influential figures from the tech industry, educators, and the media. She also made sure to invite John, though she kept the details of her connection to him a secret. She wanted to surprise him and show him the impact his kindness had made. On the day of the launch, John received an invitation to a high-profile tech event. Puzzled but curious, he decided to attend. As he walked into the grand hall, he felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. The room was filled with people, and a large stage was set up at the front. John found a seat, wondering what had prompted the invitation. As the event began, Emily took the stage, her presence commanding attention. She began her presentation, explaining the inspiration behind her app and its potential to change lives. John watched in awe, recognizing the young woman before him, but not yet grasping the full connection. Toward the end of her speech, Emily's tone grew more personal. "I want to share a story," she began, her voice steady and filled with emotion. 12 years ago, I was a lost and frightened child, begging on the streets. A kind man saw me, offered me food, and gave me shelter. He believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. John's heart pounded as he listened, the realization dawning on him. Emily continued, her eyes scanning the audience until they found John. "That man's name is John, and he's here with us today. John, could you please join me on stage?" The room erupted in applause as John stood, his emotions a whirlwind of pride, gratitude, and love. He walked to the stage, tears mingling with his. 3. Full circle. Emily continued, her voice breaking with emotion. "John, you gave me a chance when I had nothing. You showed me kindness and love, and you believed in me. Everything I've achieved is because of you. Thank you for changing my life." She presented John with a token of gratitude, a beautifully crafted wooden plaque with the words, "To John, my guardian and friend, thank you for believing in me." The audience stood in admiration, applauding the profound bond between them. The story ended with John and Emily embracing, surrounded by applause and admiration from the audience. Their journey had come full circle, a testament to the transformative power of kindness, a band, and the enduring impact of believing in someone. The warmth of their connection filled the room, inspiring everyone present to believe in the power of giving and the incredible journeys it could set in motion. Thank you for being a part of Narrative Stories. Your support and engagement mean the world to us. We are committed to bringing you the best in storytelling. What kinds of stories would you like to see next? Share your thoughts in the comments below.